Hello and welcome to For Future Generations, episode 21. It is the 22nd of June, and it is the Lord's Day. Hope you are having a happy Lord's Day. Hope you're having a wonderful day. It is a beautiful day that God has made for us today. I am joined, as always, by my wonderful co-host, Sean. Sean, how are you, man?
I'm doing good. I'm excited about this guest, so I'm ready to get to it.
Yeah, and the guest tonight is Mr. Jeff Younger. Jeff Younger, Sean and I were at a convention, an anniversary celebration for the True Texas Project in Fort Worth, and we ran into Mr. Younger there, and we had a great time. And we said, you know what, we want to have you on the show sometime, and that time has arrived. So, Mr. Younger, thank you very much for coming on the show. We're really excited to have you.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So, the name of the show is a bit provocative. Some of y'all might see Iran war and nuclear fallout. And it is the end of the world as we know it, but so far I feel fine. But, a lot going on. It may, in fact, be the beginning of the end for the great American empire, the great Anglo Empire. Or it could just be another day. It could, like that saying, for you it was the end of the world. For me it was Tuesday. It might be another one of those moments, but time alone will tell. But we are going to speculate some things. But let's see, where do we want to start? So first off, want to get, for those of you who don't know who Mr. Younger is, want to talk a little bit about who he is and where does he come from. So Mr. Younger, you're here in Texas, a local, and you've been in the news in the last year or 2 years or so. Do you want to give us kind of the 5-minute, the quick spiel on who you are and some of the things that you've gone through?
Sure. Look, when my son was 3 years old, my ex-wife started transitioning to a girl. She's a pediatrician in Coppell, Texas. And she used her relationship with licensed care providers to force me out of the house. If your listeners go to YouTube and search for a video, "Mommy Says I'm a Girl," they'll see the first iPhone video I ever took with my son saying his mother is teaching him that he's a girl, and my son believed her.
And he was 3 years old at the time.
3 years old, and he's 3 years old in that video. Mm-hmm. And then the courts found that I actually had falsely accused her of transitioning my son to a girl, and on that basis restricted my visitation in the divorce, which we now know she was just lying to the court. Mm-hmm. In 2019, she had ramped it up. The school transitioned my son behind my back. I had to fight the school district. 2019, we had a huge trial again when she tried to get sole control of the boys. The best transgender science, quote unquote, science experts in the world showed up on both sides. My expert was Dr. Levine, who started the first transgender clinic in the United States at Johns Hopkins University. And they closed their clinic in 4 years because their data showed in 1973 that they were harming patients. So they knew this was harming people way back then. I got 50-50 custody and no child support and a check on all medical procedures on my sons after that 2019 trial. But the judges in Dallas County removed my case from that judge, gave it to Judge Bloody Mary Brown in 301st District Court. And she systematically stripped me of all parental rights and eventually let my sons move to California. I went up to the Texas Supreme Court to challenge that. The Texas Supreme Court agreed that my son could move to California, even though California had passed its transgender kidnapping law. So then I went into a California court. They denied me an independent medical exam, denied me an independent psychological exam. They my ex-wife didn't provide any evidence for a discovery for me, which is illegal. I had to provide thousands of pages of discovery. The judge illegally sealed the trial so the press could not attend. And they stripped me of even more of my parental rights. Now I can't even make phone calls to my son or even write them letters or give them birthday gifts. And a month after that trial, my son was chemically castrated at LA Children's Hospital at their gender clinic. 2 weeks ago, after a 9-month campaign, I shut that gender clinic down. It's the largest gender clinic in the United States. Can't talk too much about how I did that because I'm still under seal from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Eventually, I will be able to talk about it. So I've shut down the gender clinic where my son was going. In retaliation, she just filed. I just got the paperwork yesterday. I put it on X. She filed to change my son's name to a fake girl's name, and she wants to keep that name secret from me, so I can't talk about it. That's where I'm at.
Yeah.
In the process, I've discovered that she was being funded by 2 George Soros foundations and 2 lesbian foundations funded by USAID. So I've been fighting the U.S. government, deep state, and George Soros, and that's why in the heart of conservative Texas, the judges consistently ruled against me and put my son in danger.
Yeah. So what you're saying is I paid to have your son mutilated.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And I'm not paying child support right now, and I'm refusing to pay it because the official position of both Texas and California is that I have to pay medical child support for my sons. And so they're telling me I have to pay for my son's castration. So I'm telling them to go fuck themselves.
Yeah. Fair enough. I mean, it's the worst things in the world. I mean, Sam Hyde once said, they want your children raped and murdered, and they think it's funny. And
they do think it's funny. Yeah.
When we win, the thing to remember is that these people had no remorse, and they had, these people have names and addresses. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's a bad thing. But anyway, speaking of people who want to get people harmed and castrated and murdered, and what in the world is going on with Iran? So you have been very vocal on Twitter. I've followed you and shared a lot of your stuff. And over the last week or so, so breaking news, folks, for those of you who don't know, 24 hours ago or so, the United States attacked Iran, blew up at least 3 locations that are, nuclear adjacent of some sort, used for processing nuclear fissile material, probably with the intention of creating a bomb. But, that is still up for negotiation or, interpretation, what exactly they're doing underground. But if you're just trying to make nuclear power, you probably don't hide it underneath a mountain. But the United States flew in, blew up 3 locations. We don't know what kind of damage was done. We don't know to what extent the retaliation, such as it is, if there's going to be a retaliation, how far reaching that's going to be. But on Twitter today, saw a couple people saying things like this, and I posted as well. It was a limited airstrike against military targets. There was no declaration of war, just like Pearl Harbor. So, we're not trying to start World War III, but if we were, what would we be doing different? Yeah. Sean, did you have a couple things to say about what you've been seeing on the internets?
Well, I mean, it's the same playbook we've seen for, at least our entire adult lives, is that, when I was in Afghanistan, it wasn't a war, right? It was an operation. So It didn't need an act of Congress, but they still consider me a veteran of a foreign war, even though I wasn't at war, apparently. I don't know. So it's a lot
funny how that works, right?
Yeah, it's a lot
if you're on the USS Liberty and you get blown up by the Israeli Air Force, you can't be a member of the Veterans of Foreign Wars because you weren't in a foreign war.
Right.
But if you went to Afghanistan, which was just a regional conflict, by gum, you're a foreign war veteran.
It was an operation.
Yeah. Funny how that works. Mm-hmm. Well, anyhow, Mr. Younger, you want to give us... I did want to talk a little bit about the history of it. And Mr. Younger, despite the fact that your name is Younger, you, in fact, are the oldest person on the panel here.
Yes.
So you were alive for some of the history of Iran that I wanted to go through. But I just wanted to do maybe about, anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes on the history of Iran. And I've been reading up on it a little bit over the last. Well, I've been interested in Persian history pre-Alexandrian Persian history for a long time.
Yeah, me too.
And one of the curiosities about Persian history is, the United States has a distinct starting point, and the history of Europe kind of, has this moment where it kind of starts and has distinct moments, whereas Persian history just kind of flows all the way to the beginning of time. Noah gets off the ark, Babylon's right there in Mesopotamia, the dispersing of the languages, and boom, there you've got it, the Aryan people, which for those of you who don't know, Iran, that's just the Farsi word for Aryan. So Persians, Aryans, Iranians are not Arabs, for those of you who may not be aware. But if you could, I don't want to lean on you too heavily, but did you want to give us like a little bit of a survey of Persian history or Iranian history, or at least as far as your lifetime is concerned? I have two things that I want to touch on, and then you can kind of pick up.
Sure.
Maybe with Mossadegh would be a good place for you to jump in. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I can. I'm prepared to go back as late as the 7th century, and I think.
Well, take it away.
The reason that I say that is I think there have been key events in the history of Persia that molded this psyche of the Persian people, and we don't talk enough when we have these discussions about national character.
Right.
And the way that their histories and cultures have molded their worldview. And it's just not possible to talk about possible policy outcomes or possible intentions or future war actions without understanding the national character of people. So there's a whole history, which I won't go into, of the steppe nomads and the whole migration from the modern Lake Baikal region all the way through Samarkand, all the stands today, all the way to modern day Hungary. And there's a lot of interplay with Persia. So in the 7th century, the Sasanian Empire was finally put down by the Persians. And the Persian sense of this, it's often written incorrectly. When you read Persian historians, they talk about it differently. They have a sense that they absorbed, they were absorbed but never erased by these people. So they developed a sense of a culture that can endure occupation. Shiism comes to the fore in around 1501 or 22, depending on who you talk to, and this developed a change from we're kind of absorbing these other cultures, we're living amidst them, to being a rampart against surrounding powers. So
right, because they're Shia and all of their neighbors are Sunni.
Yeah, and they fought.
It's like just them.
People forget that they fought the Sunni Ottomans, right?
Yeah,
and you get this rise of the Twelver Shiism that centers on loyalty to a different line within Islam, and that becomes very important later in the civil war in Islam. In 1890 to 92, you have an important event after the Anglo-Iranian War. There was a giant protest of the ulama. So in Persian society, the ulama are like the merchant class. They would be like the German burghers. Mm-hmm. In the cities, a rich merchant class developed. They essentially led a revolt and a successful one over tobacco. And what it showed was that with concerted class action within Iran, they could throw off foreign concessions from very powerful forces like England. And they could roll it back. And that consciousness really didn't develop until right at the turn of the 20th century. You get a kind of constitutional revolution around 1906, and a new idea kind of emerges that rulers should be checked by the law. Now, that's something that Americans, we take for granted.
Right.
But that was a very new idea to the Iranians. And to this day, they really haven't come to grips with it. And it's a real tension in their society and their government. You had Reza Shah's coup, that was in 1921. And this is a really interesting thing to talk about, which comes up even today. There's a kind of pride in modernization, but also a suspicion of westernization.
Mm-hmm.
And that still exists in Iran today. Iran, for example, has turned down Russia's offer to set up a complete network of air defense structures at Russia's expense. And Iran has turned it down repeatedly because they have deep suspicions of the West.
And to them, Russia is part of the West.
Part of the West.
In 1941, World War II, England and Russia, which was the USSR at the time, both at the same time invaded, for no reason, invaded Iran.
Right.
And that to them, they see both of those as Western powers.
So
they're suspicious of Russia as much as they're suspicious of Europe, though they might not hate them quite as much as they hate England and the U.S. at the moment.
And only because, America is so antagonistic to Russia. Really nothing because of anything the Russians did to be positive towards them.
It's kind of like why Vietnam and China got cozy. It's like the Vietnamese and the Chinese have never liked each other.
No.
But the only reason they got in bed together was because they were both fighting the U.S. at the same time.
That's right. And I think we're going to see some interesting things happen when we start talking about this current conflict. Now we're at Mossadegh. So you wanted to talk about Mossadegh.
Yeah. So 1951, Mossadegh is the prime minister of Iran. They've established a parliamentary government system, voting, both men and women voting in their system. So a very, very modern country by, modern democratic standards. But Mossadegh comes along, and there's this thing going on in the Persian Gulf called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. And it's hard to say for sure what the numbers actually are because the company did not share any of its information publicly. But the money, the profits that they were making off of Iranian oil. So for those of you who don't know, quick aside here, Iran is one of the foremost oil producers in the world.
Yes.
They have some of the most and some of the best oil in the world, but it's all in one place. So Iran is a really big country, massive. Like if you see Iran superimposed across the United States, it will blow your mind how large this thing is. But the thing about this large country is all of their oil is right on the Arab Gulf Coast.
That's right.
Right across from these people that they really hate called Arabs. And, the Arabs have, thanks to the United States, a fully functional modern military. And all of the oil that flows out of Iran goes on oil tankers, big, heavy, slow boats, very flammable, right underneath the nose of Arabs who could easily just blow it all up. So there is a reason why Iranians might want to pursue nuclear power, and it has to do with the fact that, if they suddenly go to war with Arabia, they will not have any more oil. It's just that's game's up for now anyway. But anyway, that aside, this oil started being exploited by English prospecting companies. Mm-hmm. And these Englishmen came in the late 1800s. They discovered oil. And they established the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, or depending on who you're talking to, they might refer to it as the Anglo-Persian or the English-Iranian. It's all the same company. But anyway, this company was being run by Englishmen, but the workers on the ground, pulling the stuff out of the ground, driving the boats, were all Persians, Iranians. And something along the lines of 60% of all profits from the oil coming out of the ground in Persia, being shipped all over the world, was going to the English. It was going to England, not the government of England, not the UK government, but private citizens who were involved in this venture. And very, very little of it was actually going to the Iranian people. And the Iranians, understandably, were a bit peeved about this. Here is, the number one export of our nation is being pillaged, as it were, exported under our noses away from us to other countries around the world. And we are seeing effectively none of the profits. The money's not coming home. The oil's not being used domestically to build our economy. It's just sucked up, shipped out, and we get peanuts. So Mossadegh comes along in the 1950s, and he pushes real hard for this thing called nationalization. Now, as Westerners, as Western capitalists, we hear the word nationalization and we're thinking bleeding heart communists. These people want to nationalize. They want to nationalize the industry. To the worker goes the reward and all this nonsense, right? But when you look at Mossadegh's idea, essentially what he wanted to do was he wanted to seize a foreign company and make it domestic, which if you're using the word nationalize to describe that, it's actually a pretty appropriate term to use because you're turning it into a product of the nation. But it can be confused for some other nationalist, global homo communist nonsense. This was not necessarily a bad thing. In 1951, Mossadegh did achieve that. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company was nationalized, and more or less that led to the UK and the United States bringing about a coup d'etat in Iran because they did not like the fact that they had lost that sweet, sweet oil money. So your libertarian friend who always told you, man, the only reason we're in the Middle East is because of oil. Your libertarian friend might be retarded, but he's actually right. That's really, at the end of the day, it was all about oil. Mr. Younger, did you have some more you wanted to say about Mossadegh? Some of his some brilliant machinations that he brought about in his time.
Well, he was an icon of anti-imperialism within Iran generally, and his slogan was "Stolen Democracy." And the idea, but democracy didn't mean it the way we mean it in the West. It meant stolen self-determination would be a better way to translate it. And of course, as soon as he nationalized the oil, by the way, Iran received less than 16% of the profits. The entire country, less than 16%. And what Mossadegh said, he would still give the investors, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company investors, he would still give them 20%. Right, even though he nationalized it, so it really wasn't full nationalization as we would think about it. But the CIA and MI6 worked together and backed a coup against Mossadegh and overthrew this very popular leader and restored Mohammad Reza Shah to power. And a white revolution is what Reza Shah came in talking about and instituted what he called reforms. And these reforms took the form of the Savak. And the Savak was a CIA and MI6 trained secret police, which they consciously modeled after the NKVD, by the way. The structure and the mechanisms, they specifically used ethnic minorities because they knew they couldn't get Persians to hurt Persians. Right. And the same thing. And
man, I'm glad we don't have that going on right now in the United States, where they're just hiring a bunch of foreigners to.
We'd never do that and make them police officers. Or that we would never do that.
Another thing relevant to your situation, if you look into a lot of the doctors who are doing these transgender surgeries, a lot of them are Indians.
Oh yeah, 100%.
A lot of them are Jewish. A
100%.
lot of them are not heritage American because getting an American to do that to American kids is a lot harder.
Absolutely right. And the Savak used this and tortured tens of thousands. When I say tens of thousands, we're on the order of 80,000 Iranians were tortured by the Savak. It was not uncommon to know people in one's family who were crippled or maimed from the tortures of the Savak. And they, of course, restored the old way of doing business with oil. And this began to resonate with younger people who began to understand that the Western idea of modernity brings a kind of moral vacuum and a kind of force that really they hadn't even seen under the Sassanids. And this eventually led to the Islamic Revolution, which is always portrayed in America. And I remember watching on television the revolution happen. Like I was as a kid, I was on a black and white RCA television. I would actually get up early in the morning and watch the news, and my mom and dad used to laugh about that.
Nerd.
Yeah, I was a news nerd, a total news nerd, and so I watched this revolution happen. It's often presented as a revolution of old men who are clerics, but it really wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually a youth revolution. It would be something more like an Islamic hippie movement.
Yeah, they're old clerics now, but at the
right.
time it was, if you're young, if you're hip, if you're religiously devout, take heed, young Christian nationalists. It was a young, devout religious movement.
It was, and prior to the revolution, the mental model for the Shah and for the whole Pahlavi dynasty, the mental model was that Islam and the kingdom can coexist, right?
Mm-hmm.
After the revolution, it was the idea that Islam and revolt could coexist.
Right.
The idea of revolt becomes part of this notion, the Shia notion of Islam, which had previously been about external conquest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It comes about
from the Seljuk Turks, the Arab conquest, Genghis Khan, all the way on down. They've had these invasions that just take over their country, and then but nevertheless Persia persists. And, that heel turn where it goes from we are going to survive, like the Afghanis, their concept of you're here, but in 50 years you're going to be gone, and we'll still be here. They had a mood shift to no, we're a revolutionary movement. We're a revolutionary people. I mean, to this day, the Iranian army is called the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. That's their name.
Yeah, the IRCG. We'll talk about how they actually have two armies and the setup of the government. It's very interesting, actually. So then you go into 1980 into the Iran-Iraq War, and this is a brutal war. Yeah, this is a brutal war. Saddam Hussein is essentially a secular ruler over many religious peoples, and Saddam Hussein essentially tempted Iraq into the war, goaded them into the war. And Iran really didn't want to do this because Iraq had modern Western weapons, and Iran knew that.
Yeah, and so Saddam Hussein, a secular leader over multiple people, and one thing that everybody who rules over a disparate society realizes is that there's nothing quite like an external threat to unite internal divisions.
That's right.
And so he invented that and brought them to war with Iran, a country that, like you said, no modern military. This was supposed to be a walk in the park. Yeah.
And, and then like all leaders over multi-ethnic states, Saddam Hussein cleverly used this to eradicate troublesome ethnic groups because he just put them at the front lines to be slaughtered and didn't support them. So this is
very astute. If you've been paying attention to the Russo-Ukraine war, there's been some of that going on too. Putin's putting those. He's been putting the Chechens on the front lines. He's like, here, you troublesome Chechens, go eat some lead.
That's right. So we get human wave assaults. To break through the minefields, they actually brought in high school students, males, and had them clear minefields, and almost all of them were killed. There's giant cemeteries to them in Iran. And they developed the idea of dying in war for Shia Islam as a form of martyrdom. And the martyrdom culture begins actually during this period. Mm-hmm. And the Ayatollahs developed the idea of the suicide bomber and they called it the Islamic ballistic missile. It's a targeted attack, but it didn't require technology. All it required is a firm belief in Shia Islam. And they put out a series of fatwas, and you start to see the rise of the suicide bomber, and it was extremely effective in the Iran-Iraq war. Iran developed ways of locating Iraqi command posts and the suicide bomb, and disrupt the army. And so after millions had died, they sort of came to a stalemate, and basically they never really came to a peace treaty. They just sort of just quit attacking each other.
Yeah, they both declared victory and went home.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. And it was a strange thing. Of course, this is happening before I'm, some of this happening before I was alive, all of it happening before I was conscious of it. But for me to go back and read about the Iran-Iraq war, just really mind-boggling to see how these people just throw everything at each other. Yes. You have one that has a superior military force and the other that has a larger population, and how the two things actually come into a stalemate. At the end of the day, your technology can't, you can't overcome sheer numbers. And that's why they got into a stalemate. Iran suffered huge casualties.
Single battle casualties over 100,000.
Yeah, single battle casualties.
Yeah.
And they're still, to this day, even after that great loss, 1/4 of the entire world's population lives in Iran.
Yeah.
It's a huge country. That's a lot of people.
And they have babies. They have replacement rates of having babies. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that's very interesting, I kind of like to, when I think about these kinds of issues in history, I like to use Plutarch's method, where you sort of have parallel lives and you compare them. At the same time that in Iran, they were developing this suicide bomber doctrine in this terrible war, Henry Kissinger was betraying Hafez al-Assad in Syria. And Hafez al-Assad had a vision to unite Arabs, Shia and Sunni, and to create a Muslim hegemony over the Middle East that would take it away from the British and the Americans. And Henry Kissinger used a lot of very clever and actually deceptive diplomacy with Saudi Arabia to trick Hafez al-Assad, and he actually never forgave that.
Yeah.
And he began to learn from the suicide bomber doctrine from the Iranians and began to think about how he could get revenge on the West. And bizarrely, most of the terrorism that was blamed on Gaddafi was actually committed by Hafez al-Assad. But Gaddafi, whenever the West would frame him for it, would let them because he felt it enhanced his cachet.
Yeah, it made him look like a real bad dude.
That's right. But like the Lockerbie bombing and all that was done by Hafez al-Assad as part of his suicide bomber idea about getting revenge for this stuff.
Yeah.
So Syria becomes very important later when we talk about the energy politics of the region. But so from that terrible tragedy where you have like millions who died and the rise of the suicide bomber, you get a completely different point of view that emerges again in Iran. And it's the idea that that you can, with pure faith alone and commitment, can beat the modern technology of the West, or at least equal it. So then we arrive at the nuclear period for Iran, right? I think a lot of people know, but there's actually a fatwa in Iran against building nuclear weapons. The strategy, the grand strategy of Iran has really never been ever to make a nuclear weapon, but to threaten to make one.
Yeah. That's why all the way from the 1980s to today, they've always been 2 weeks away from making a nuclear weapon.
Yes.
Well, it's because they designed it that way.
That's right.
They don't want to have a nuke, but they want to have the ability to have a nuke.
That's right.
I mean, if you think about it, how hard would it be for them to get one? Pakistan has them. Russia has them. North Korea has them. These are all countries, two of which they're quite close to. Crossing Afghanistan is not a huge endeavor. It's a big country, but it could be done with a nuclear weapon. You could drive a truck across the country and have a nuke in 2 days. Russia, same thing. If they wanted a nuke from Russia, they could get one in a matter of days.
Yeah, no question.
If they wanted to have one, they could probably build one with the fissile material they have currently.
Yeah.
But what they've always wanted is to have their cake and eat it too. They want to be like North Korea. They want to be left alone because they have nuclear capabilities, but they also don't want to have a nuclear weapon because they don't want to be bad people. Something some people might not understand is the United States is not the only country that thinks we're the good guys. Iranians want to see themselves as the good guys, and part of being a good guy.
It's sad you have to say that, but you do have to say that.
Yeah, part of being the good guy in their eyes is we are going to have capability to do bad things and not do bad things.
Mm-hmm.
And so that plays into this mindset where they're like, we want to be able to have a bomb without having the bomb. We want to have the cake of not being invaded, not having our regime overthrown, but we also don't want to have a bomb pointed at people to threaten them to behave.
Yeah, it gives them everything they would have with nuclear deterrence with none of the downsides.
Theoretically.
Yeah. Now, it hasn't worked out that way. But
yeah, how's that going for you guys?
Yeah, we'll talk about why that is. Yeah. So I think we should talk a little bit about the national character. If we're going to talk about why their attitude toward nuclear weapons, like what is it? Well, one of the books I rely on for this, it's a book I really enjoyed. I've read it like 3 or 4 times. It's a book by V.S. Naipaul, and it's called Among the Believers. And he went to Iran right after the revolution, and he talked to like ordinary people. He didn't talk to politicians, artists and communist revolutionaries, people who were anti-communist, everything, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things he found was that for the Iranians, the revolution replaced what they perceived as an old, rigid form of Islam. So we think of them as imposing this super rigid form of Islam, but from the perspective of the revolutionaries, they were replacing it with something that was much less rigid because it had an ideology and a purpose that was just not tied to religious observance, but had to do with actually the political structure of the people. And as part of that, though, and I think this is interesting, because I'm writing an article on different concepts of justice. And the way we think of justice is a lot of people in America think of it as restitution. Some people think of it as rehabilitation. There's no general agreement in America on what political justice or secular justice would look like. In the Shia world, justice came to be essentially equivalent to revenge. And so it was state justice was just a procedural way of taking individual revenge. And that psychology, the psychology is what drove that's what justified taking the hostages at the U.S. Embassy. That's what justified the paramilitary action against Israel and so forth. And so young Iranians, even communists, found ways to unite Marxism, this atheist religion, with these Islamic ideas. So it just permeated all of Persian society. And the zeal that it affected the young, I don't think can be overstated. It really, in America, we would almost say it was like a revival movement. It created that kind of zeal and rose the spirit of the Iranian people to that level. And one of the things that Naipaul describes, which I thought was very interesting, that there was an unresolved contradiction in this that he saw already occurring in 1979, was this quest for ideological purity. But how do you map that up with the practical necessities of political government? And so eventually the way they resolved it is they basically split their government in two. And so when you look at how their government's organized, they have 2 armies, for example. They have an Iranian army, which does things like border defense and stuff like that. But they also have the IRCG, which reports directly to the mullahs. And its job is internal security. They are the special forces They are the ones who do the hybrid warfare and all that kind of thing. So you really have two kinds of governments. You have a civil government that looks parliamentarian in character. They elect a prime minister. And then you have an elected for life aristocracy, Shia aristocracy, which can put a check on almost any candidate from running. So they have way more power than the parliament. And that's the way they've tried to resolve this contradiction. I don't think it's been very successful for them for a number of reasons we could talk about. But the supreme leader is the supreme authority. Constitutional oversight comes from like a guardian council, but they cannot overrule the supreme leader. But on paper, they're Republican.
Yeah. Something a lot of people don't realize, Iran's parliament is actually very liberal. And I mean that with a small L liberal. They have proportional representation to the point where they actually have elected Jewish members of parliament. 100%. They have typically one member of parliament to represent their Jewish diaspora, because there are a lot of Jews in Iran.
Christians too.
Yeah, there's a huge Christian church in Iran. That may, in fact, be one of the reasons that they're a target right now. It seems like U.S. foreign policy is just targeted at killing every single Christian in the Middle East it possibly can. The purpose of a thing is what it does, and that is certainly what our foreign policy has been doing. But they have Zoroastrian members of parliament to represent the Zoroastrian diaspora, or a minority. They're not a diaspora, but they're minority religion status. And this is something unheard of. Even in Israel, I mean, Israel doesn't have Christians ruling in the Druze. They don't have Christians representing in their parliament. And yet Iran, this evil death to America, we want to wipe Israel off the map, boogeyman that we're constantly being told are these racists and these anti-Semites that just hate everybody and everything, have a Jewish guy in their parliament. Yeah, representing the interests of the Jewish population. It doesn't make sense if you're swallowing the propaganda, but their parliament, insofar as parliaments go, functions quite well.
Yeah, and it often acts in opposition to the Supreme Council and the Supreme Leader. Essentially, their checks and balances in the government are between the Republican form of the parliament and the aristocracy form of the mullahs, and that's how they do it. The mullahs have a lot of power because they can remove any candidate from the ballot, and so they have a vetting council which vets all candidates, and that gives them a ton of power. So they don't have primaries like we do, right? So that's done by this oligarchy, this aristocracy, depending on whether you like them or hate them. Yeah. But the current president is one who came into power on a program of rapprochement with the West against what the mullahs wanted, and and he, of course, found himself rebuffed at every turn, similar to what's happened with the Russians. And in the modern situation, if your audience tries to put themselves in the shoes of an Iranian, let's say that you're an Iranian leader, if you look back on the time in the Afghanistan war and the Iraq war, and I wrote about this at the time, Israel lied to us to get us to send our troops into Iraq. And then didn't send a single IDF soldier into Iraq. 4,000 of our soldiers died, and the IDF didn't send a single soldier into Iraq. We put, 2 Army divisions and 2 Marine divisions in Afghanistan. We put them all on the border with Iran. So we basically pursued geopolitical containment against Iran for 20 years by putting troops there, and we still have troops in Iraq. Right. The objective of America has always been to encircle Iran. That's what American forces were. That's why Israel fooled us into going into Iraq. And if you think about the imperatives for any conventional military, there's 3 of them basically. It's It's be able to mass your forces against the weaker enemy at specific places and time, avoid encirclement, and protect your lines of communication, right? We destroyed 2 of those by surrounding Iran at a crucial moment, surrounding Iran with military units from the United States. And so if you put yourself in that position, suddenly now America's out of Afghanistan. They're still in Iraq. There's still air bases there. There's intelligence gathering bases there. You still, in your mind, you still feel encircled.
Yeah. I mean, we're all through Arabia.
Yeah.
We're all in Iraq, and all of our guns are pointed at Iran from those bases.
And why is that? Why not Saudi Arabia? That's an important question.
I mean, Saudi Arabia is far less liberal, far more oppressive, far more religiously insane than Iran ever was, even at its height of religious insanity. And yet they're, our, as it were, greatest ally in the Middle East, second only to the people who have never been a functional ally to us in the Middle East.
That's right.
So,
and of course, that goes back to the petrodollar system.
Right.
Where Nixon and Kissinger made a deal with Saudi Arabia that they would only take payment for oil in U.S. dollars. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing they would do. And that was an attempt to preserve the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency after the collapse of Bretton Woods in 1972. Mm-hmm. And so as soon as we did that, it kept the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. And I wrote an article about why that might not actually be a good thing to be the world's reserve currency. But it kept everything economically the same in the United States. But it was kind of a deal with the devil. We chose sides in the civil war between Sunni and Shia. And the Iranians rightly understood that as a direct threat because Saudi Arabia is at war with Iran. It's a low intensity war and a proxy war with the Shia. So that is part of the problem too. We've taken sides in this religious war. And I don't think a lot of Americans understand that. And if you put yourself in the mindset of the Shia, this is very difficult to conceive of America being in an alliance, a long-term alliance with Saudi Arabia, and yet being neutral towards Iran. Yeah, very difficult to believe that. And so that helps explain, I think, some of the psychology and the character of people in Iran who are making decisions and why they've made some of the decisions that they made. People are always complaining about Iran supporting terrorism. Well, they're supporting proxy forces.
And we are too.
We do it all the time. Yeah. Because
everybody keeps saying, Iran is the world's #1 sponsor of terror. And my rejoinder to that is always, well, #2, the U.S. is we've got a lot more money to throw at it than they do.
No doubt about it. And I mean, we supported the Mujahideen in the 70s, right? We even supported the Taliban for a period of time. We supported ISIS, created and supported ISIS. So we use proxy. Why do people use proxy forces? So they don't have to commit their own forces. And Iran doesn't want to project its own army across Jordan and across Syria and all these other places. So it uses proxy forces there to project force. And so it's a perfectly normal form of warfare that's been used for a long time by America. I don't get why people get upset about it when Iran does it.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing the exact same thing. If you think that we are not funding minorities to terrorize Iranians in Iran, I have oceanfront property to sell you in Arizona.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely something that has been going on from time immemorial. Since the 1800s, the UK has been doing it. We've been doing it with World War I when the empire fell and America inherited the English Empire. We picked up right where they left off, supporting these terrorist groups against their neighbors, not the least of which is Israel. Israel is a terrorist nation that the United States fully funds. Yeah,
no question about it.
Before we get on to the next part of our show, I do want to cover nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. How did that get into the area? But that get on the board? But before we do, we have a bunch of comments that just want to roll through here pretty quick. We've got Marie Christine A says, Mr. Younger's been through so much and is being vindicated as time goes by. Yes, very true. Mr. Younger, we definitely feel for what you're going through, and we appreciate you standing strong and being public about it. I mean, I'm sure there are other people who are going through similar, and they've just took the kick in the teeth and put their tail between their legs and went home. And you're standing up and fighting it, and we really appreciate that. Marie Christine A. again says, apparently Iran's former royal family of Iran supports Iran's potential regime change. Yeah, why would that be?
Yeah, of course.
If I'm the exiled prince of a giant nation, of course I'm for regime change. That's how I get back in.
Yeah, let's change it to me.
Yeah, I'll pick it up. Sean, do you want to pick up here?
Sure. Marie Christine, she's got a bunch of comments here. There's a sentiment to get rid of Iran's current government, but hardly anyone wants the Pahlavis to return. Am I pronouncing that right?
Pahlavi, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're not on the ground over there, so it's really hard to know what the on-the-ground sentiment is. But I've talked to some Iranians here in the United States, and two different guys, and both of them have very different perspectives. One of them just loves the Shah, wishes the Shah would come back. One of them doesn't like the Shah at all and thinks that the current regime is better, but he's not fond of the current regime either, which is why he's here, not there.
Yeah, and to me, the geopolitical problems that Iran faces would not change by changing the government. That's not going to change, and because all it's going to do is going to create problems in the east instead of in the west. But it will be the same problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they're right on the line. I mean, to their east they've got China. To the north, they've got Russia, and to the west, they've got the U.S., and that tension's going to be there.
It's going to be there.
If we just drag them to our side, all that's going to do is it's going to make them the hot point for all of Russia and China's, directional. They're going. Yeah, this is what happened, with Germany in World War I. Mm-hmm. It's like they're in the middle.
Yeah.
You've got England to the north, you've got France to the east, or to the west, Russia to the east. Right. And Austria-Hungary, which is on the decline, Italy, which has still not found her feet. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Germany's right in the middle of all of that. Of course, she's going to be the touchstone for all conflict in Europe, and Iran is that for Central Asia. And no regime is going to change that. You could have the very best king of Persia return. I mean, you could get any of the ancient kings to come back and take over, and essentially what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of the same.
That's right. If you're friends with the West, you're going to be enemies with the East. If you're friends with the East, you'll be enemies with the West. If you're neutral, you'll be an enemy of both.
Of everybody. Yeah, they tried that. During World War II. The Shah of Iran said, we are going to remain neutral. Yeah. And for his troubles, he got invaded by the USSR and Great Britain. Both invaded simultaneously, kicked him out, and they took a long time to recover from that.
Yeah, and this has molded the diplomacy of Iran. They understand this. And there's another aspect that we could get into, sort of like the at least from my perspective, what the national interest calculations are of each of the sides. But one of the issues is, Iran is providing about a third of the oil to China.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Some people say up to half, but it's my reading says it's more like a third. But, energy is basically a proxy for GDP. So cutting that off would cut a third out of China's GDP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they have interests in that area too. Also, they are a net electricity export.
That's right.
Part of their nuclear ambitions is they export electricity both to Russia and to China. Those grids run long, and China's getting
too.
Yeah, Yeah. So it's like if you want to have a washing machine, air conditioning, dishwasher, electric lights, all of those things that make life so comfortable, and you live in Western China, guess what? You're leaning on the crutch of Iran to make that happen.
Yeah, that's
And,
right. And of course, the American deep state, which I call the American empire, would love to take that energy away from China.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that there are two major corridors for the Belt and Road Initiative that run through Iran, including a major naval port. And that also is something that could hurt Russia and China. So there's just no way getting around it. Where Iran is located it's going to be very difficult. I mean, in some ways, Turkey tries to walk this fine line, between Russia and Europe, but Iran has it much more difficult because they're closer to China. They have actual vital economic relationships with China. It's not easy for them to turn away from that or to play neutral.
Mm-hmm. And they're actually served better by being friends with the East than they are with being friends with the West. I mean, what can the U.S. offer to Iran other than we won't blow you up?
Yeah.
I mean, Russia and China can blow them up too, but they also give them money and they trade with them.
Yeah. Kissinger has a famous saying that it's extremely dangerous to be an enemy of the United States, but it's even more dangerous to be a friend of the United States.
Yeah, very true.
So most countries in the world understand that, perhaps Iran more acutely than others.
Mm-hmm.
But these attacks are, in my opinion, are being driven by the national interest calculations of four parties. And I don't. This is one area where I definitely see things differently than other people who comment on this. So I'd be interested to know what you guys think is the national interest calculation of Iran and taking the actions that it has. Like, it didn't have to enrich to 60%, but it did. The national interests, as you see it, of Israel and then of America.
Well, I mean, when it comes to the enrichment, I'm not a nuclear scientist, but I do enjoy dabbling and kind of reading what some people say about these things. So there's a plateau where it's very difficult to enrich up to 60%, but to enrich from 60% to 90%, which is what you need for a nuclear warhead, is quite easy.
Yes.
And so their interest there lies just in the fact that, well, if we have a bunch of material sitting around at 60%, you only need, I believe it's 20% for nuclear energy.
3.72 will do it.
Yeah, but if you're wanting to run a really tight ship and do it really well, you want to improve that. But 20% is like the top.
Yeah.
You have no reason to go above that number.
Right.
Because it's just absurd. There is diminishing returns when it comes to this thing. I mean, essentially, it's a steam engine. You're creating heat to boil water, and then the water turns a turbine. And I'm oversimplifying here, but a steam engine is quite primitive. You don't need a lot going on there. But enriching beyond that number, up to 60%, is quite mathematically difficult, technologically difficult. But then once you get to that 60% number, jumping from 60 to 90 is a walk in the park. You've got all your homeworks done. It's essentially just flip the switch and wait a couple minutes and boom, you're there. Wait a day and a half and you've got it. Like we were talking about before, their desire is to have not necessarily a nuclear weapon in a silo ready to launch, but to have all of, as it were, the Legos are in the box. The Legos are in the box. The instructions are laid out on the table. We're ready to go if we need to. Our Samson option is we make a nuke and we have it in 2 days, anywhere from 2 days to 2 weeks. We can launch it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so why do they have that ability? In your view, why do they want the ability to have a nuke?
Well, why have we invaded every single Middle Eastern country except Pakistan?
Right, exactly.
Because they have a nuke.
That's right.
Because if we did, they would call us on our garbage pretty quick.
They would. And I don't think a lot of people understand that nuclear states are essentially, invulnerable to conventional army invasions.
Yeah, North Korea exists for a reason.
That's right.
And it's not because we like them. It's because we can't do anything about them without extreme consequences.
That's right. I'm sorry, I interrupted someone. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I'm going to skip over the Marie Christine. You're kind of blowing up the chat by yourself,
Yeah.
but
we appreciate you coming in here. She had a couple things to say just about how Saddam Hussein was our ally during the Iran-Iraq war. Yeah. He was using chemical weapons during that war, and we absolutely, see no evil because you're our buddy. But as soon as, like Kissinger said, it's even more dangerous to be an ally. Eventually we went in there and we hanged him just because we felt like we could.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
But our friend Z here says, so to recap, in the Middle East, we're against the liberal power and friends with the fundamentalists, but at home, it's the reverse. This has been the worst trade deal in the history of trade deals. Yeah, this has been the worst trade deal in the history of trade deals, maybe ever. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. What is it about American foreign policy? We always seem to partner with the bad guys. When we were in the Balkans, why is it that we were, when the Macedonian conflicts, which my dad was deployed over there, why was it that he was going over there and looking around? It's like, why are we killing Christians on behalf of Muslims?
Correct. We were on the wrong side there, big time.
We absolutely were. And we seem to have a pattern of that. Everywhere we go, we side with the bad guys against the good guys.
Yeah. I have to tell you, as I've gotten older, I've just stopped thinking about these things in moralistic terms. I've really just become an offensive realist in my approach to all this stuff. I think that the relationships of nation states is something like the relationship of men in a prison. The calculations go something like this. If you're in prison, what's the best thing to be? The biggest, baddest dude that can kill anybody in the prison. Right. So nobody can hurt you. You're just so powerful, you can just kill anybody you want.
And the second best thing is to be his buddy.
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm. Or you could be a regional power. Maybe in your cell block, you're the biggest, baddest guy, right? Mm-hmm. That'd be next best. And then finally, you would have to ally with one of those guys. And the worst place to be would be a neutral among those guys.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're trying to be like, well, I went to prison, but I'm not going to join, your Aryan Brotherhood. I'm not going to join your prison gang this, prison gang that. It's like, there's a reason everybody walking out of prison has some gang affiliation. It's because it's a survival technique.
You have to. And that's really the way, if you look at nation states, there's no sovereign law. And so that's the relationship. It's just purely the relationships that are created by security competition between nation states. So I don't even think of it really in terms of moral terms anymore. It's difficult for Americans to not do that. But I don't even describe it as good or bad. It's just a question of what effectively goes after whatever the national goals are. And America is a incredibly powerful and ruthless world power. It's ruthless. The ruthlessness of America shocks even Russians, which says something.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what we did to Muammar Gaddafi,
and
if you think we didn't do that, you're stupid.
Oh yeah,
but you see what we did to Muammar Gaddafi, you see what we did to Saddam Hussein, and you think, man, that this is how you treat the people that. I mean, it's not even like they're our enemies. I mean, like Marie was saying in the chat, Saddam Hussein was our guy. And then when we got tired of him, when we threw our toy in the corner, we stomped it for good measure.
What really happened there was Israel got tired of him.
Yeah.
And they faked intelligence to help the deep state go in there. That's really what that all came to be. And the reason we wanted to go in there is we wanted to put U.S. bases on the border with Iran. That's the
simple as.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So maybe I should just sort of lead into sort of how I think the geopolitical situation is for Iran. So we talked a little bit.
Can I interrupt real quick because I've been trying to I got a screen thing screen
okay.
share here because we were talking about the fertility rate in Iran.
Yeah.
And let me see if I can get my.
I keep my stuff minimized, so I'm going to maximize.
Are you seeing my screen there?
Not yet.
I can see it on the bottom. You want me to add it?
Here we go. Add it. Yeah, go ahead and add it.
Here we go. So 1.68 births per woman in 2022. And it's kind of hard to read those numbers, but they are on the decline for sure.
Yeah, they're way on the. You can see what they're at. I don't know why it just automatically won't give me Israel. I don't care about Israel right now, but for Iran, you're looking at 6.44 in 1984. Like that is a huge fertility rate,
and it drops
drastically. I mean, by what year did I say this was? This is 85. They're at over 6, and by the time you're in 93, they're at 3.6. Man, I mean, it's just a nosedive until you get to 1998. It's at 2.2. So
and then it kind of plateaus.
Yeah. And below 2, you're not at replacement. So
yeah.
I mean that and so they dip below. They get back to 2 in 2014, and then they've been under 2 since 2018.
Yeah,
they're still under 2.
This is the thing that this is why I brought up the birth rates, right? The liberalization of Iran is evident in this birth rate graph, and so when you have the Iranian Revolution, you don't see the drop until they start getting the liberal parliament elected, and we start, and that's happening from influence from intelligence agencies. Iran knows that it's probably the most infiltrated civilization on earth, right? But that's why I brought up the birth rates and at the time in 1979.
Yeah.
And believe me, the Iranians are keenly aware of this happening, right? They know what this means for marriage and other things in their society. It's a big fear of theirs. And, most people don't talk about these things, but these are the things that mold national character and create a consensus within societies. These are important ideas.
Yeah. And it just seems like a very interesting pattern that every nation that gets a democracy loses its birth rate.
100%, yeah.
It's like you'll see a country that gets invaded by the U.S. It goes from some sort of oppressive, some dictatorial regime where the birth rate is real high, 4 to 6, something like that. And then we institute a democracy on their behalf. We force them, through the threat of liberty, we force them to go vote. And next thing you know, the birth rate starts plummeting, just falls off the shelf.
Well, women were given the right to vote in Iran, I believe, around the year I was born, 1965. And so you go through one generation of women, that's 20 years, and then you see plummeting birth rates.
Yeah, and then it's 1980s, according to that chart that we just saw. That's when
it's exactly what happened in the United States too, by the way. One generation of females after they got the vote, and you start seeing declining birth rates.
Makes you question what real oppression is. If giving quote unquote freedom to women just causes the entire nation to stop existing. Yeah, that's not a freedom that I care to have.
I mean, it's essentially women voting to have a kind of second husband for them. Yeah. And that allows them to have choices that men have never had and that probably women shouldn't have.
Yeah. It's contrary to their God-given role.
Yeah,
and,
definitely.
What do you know? Encouraging people to fulfill a role that is contrary to what God designed them to do is bad for them. Who'd have thought?
Absolutely. And we could even take a perspective on this. In the modern world, rights are conceived as sort of these floating abstractions. You have a right to free speech. You have a right to assemble. You have these things. That is for almost all of human history, going back to ancient Greeks, ancient Persians, everybody did not understand rights that way. first and foremost, you had duties, and you were given rights sufficient to allow you to perform those duties. So whenever someone in the ancient world said, I have a right to something, they were saying, I have a duty, and therefore you have to let me do this because I have a duty to perform. Nowadays, we talk about rights as if they're completely removed from any concept of a duty. And that's another form of liberation that, it creates a social condition of dissipation.
Yep.
You were going to send us in a direction before I showed the Iran chart.
Oh, right on. Look, so we've talked about the encirclement of Iran. So if you're Iranian and you're in this position where, the American empire, NATO, is surrounding your country, and it's very clear that you're not going to be able to come to terms with them. They're not going to leave you alone. You have to think like you got this school bully that's super big and tough, and you're not so big and tough. So how do you fight in such a way that you can win against a bully like that? Well,
you bring a gun to school.
Yeah, you bring a gun. You get more. You become more powerful through a gun. That would be acquiring nuclear weapons. Another thing you might do, you might take advantage of the fact that if you insult or humiliate the bully, he has to punch you because he'll lose his reputation in the school. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you can make him punch you at the time you want in a certain way gives you power. Maybe you get him to punch you right in front of a principal, and then he gets expelled and you don't, right? There's asymmetrical ways of thinking about this power. More powerful players tend to be more rigid. And so I think Iran is thinking through how can they use that rigidity. And in a certain sense, I don't think Iran was surprised at all by this bombing. They had to expect it, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a reason that it's like a mile underground.
Correct.
They knew that this bombing was going to happen when they built it.
Right. Mm-hmm. So I went through a number of communiques in preparation for this talk with you guys. And I've, from just pretty using advanced Google search operators, basically, to pull stuff from English language accounts from translations of Persian newspapers. I've kind of come to what I think are four strategic imperatives for Iran that they've been pursuing for some time. And actually, this helped me clarify some things in my own mind doing this. One was the emphasis of the government continues to be to unite the population and to legitimize the authority of the regime itself. That seems to be their number one goal. Mm-hmm. The second is to build alliances. They're hampered in this in some ways in that they have an innate distrust of alliances. So they're of two minds about these. The third is to win global opinion. And the fourth is to weaken Israel and America. And I think that last one is actually the least important for them in certain ways. And I also think that all the three players, Iran, Israel, and America, have apocalyptic and eschatological visions that are driving in many ways their views on this conflict. Iran, being Shia, has in the back of its mind the return of the Mahdi, mm-hmm. right? The 12th Imam comes out of his hiding place. Israel has this notion of the final arrival of the Messiah, which they conceive as a warlord figure who will unite the world under Jewish power. And then you've got Christian Zionists who I think in the back of their mind have the Battle of Armageddon from the book of Revelation. And there's a definite apocalyptic feel to a lot of the rhetoric from all of the players. But when I look at the actual strategy that Iran seems to be pursuing, it's taking great steps to legitimize the authority of the regime, and the regime's authority has not collapsed. And in fact, the propaganda in Iran has galvanized opinion. It's probably more popular now than it was before the bombings. I think they aim to destroy the American presence in the Middle East, and they aim to do that by trapping the U.S. in a quagmire in the United States, in the Middle
Vietnam
East.
style.
Yeah. And if they can trap the U.S. in a quagmire and force it to run, I think they believe, and you read this in news statements by mainly from the IRCG and spokesman and the supreme leader, that this will elevate the Shia above the Saudi Arabians and allow them to achieve some level of regional equality with the Saudi Arabians. And so let's talk about what that kind of looks like operationally for them. One, it would mean the Iranians actually want to tempt the United States to invade. They want land forces to come in. And the reason is they want to put us on what some political theorists call the ladder of escalation. I don't really buy into this theory, but a lot of American policymakers do buy into it. And the idea is to do what they did with this bully. They can make the bully take a punch when it's least convenient to take a punch. And I think they intend to do this very slowly. I think they're going to start to attack U.S. interests slowly, carefully, in order to manipulate U.S. opinion, to create a lot of international pressure, and eventually force the U.S. to make another attack, which will hurt us on the world stage again. And with the ultimate aim of perhaps provoking Americans in America into turning against the government. The Vietnamese did this, and it worked. Israel, interestingly, I interpret Israel as an expansionist power. I think the Greater Israel Project is the dominant goal of the current Israeli regime and has been for a long time. And they want to be the dominant power geographically, not just politically or militarily in the region. They have a sense that all that land was given them by God anyway. And so they have a similar, apocalyptic view to the Shia themselves. In order to achieve regional hegemony, though, and I think this is going to be controversial to some people, I think Israel has to not only defeat Iran in the Middle East, but it has a covert goal of defeating America in the Middle East. And it would love to get America in a quagmire so that America is forced to move out and get those bases out and let Israel take them over. It doesn't really want to Israel doesn't want to replace America, but it would love if CENTCOM basically came under the control of Israel in the way that many European armies are under the control of NATO. And so I think Israel would love to see America get involved in a ground war and lose. How would they do that? Well, they're going to have to try to get America to commit ground troops. They've already used intelligence to get us to commit to aerial bombardment. And I think they can gin up fake intelligence to make us do it. I think they can also, once ground troops are in, it's very easy for Israel to manipulate the sequence and parameters of conflict to keep things going between America and Iran. And I think this was ginned up by Israel. I do think this conflict was ginned up by Israel. And I think
obviously, I mean, they who launched the first missile?
Of course, yeah.
It was Israel. It was Israel.
100%.
We had a peace negotiation that was going on, a nuclear negotiation that was underway. And Israel said, okay, we don't like this. We don't like you being cozy. We don't like you being buddies. We're going to send a rocket into Iran and take out a bunch of people. We're going to do precision strikes to take out key people. Yeah, there was a negotiator who came to the West, came to the U.S. and said, hey, we want to negotiate for a fully denuclearized Iran. And Israel assassinated him. Mossad took him out.
That's right.
And because if Israel didn't want a war, why would they do that?
Yeah, they want a conflict. They're not going to let Iran negotiate a no-nuke treaty. They're not going to allow that. They want a conflict. They did the same things with Hamas. Like a lot of people don't know, Netanyahu is under indictment in Israel right now for funding Hamas. He's been funding Hamas for 20 plus years. And he wants Hamas to be there as an enemy so that he can take Gaza. He needs an enemy and a reason to invade Gaza. And so, the Mossad and Israel are infamous for these kinds of deceptions.
I mean, it kind of plays back to World War II. Hitler's rise to power was funded by Americans and Brits because they needed somebody to rise to power so that they could come in and clean up the problem. And you have the same thing going on too. After Dunkirk, Hitler says, hey, I want a peace negotiation. I want a peace treaty. I'm not bombing your cities. What does Winston Churchill do? He immediately starts doing long-range bombing Berlin, bombing civilian infrastructure in Germany. And Hitler is holding out a peace treaty. He's holding back. And then eventually he says, okay, we're going to start bombing your ports. We're going to start bombing this. We're going to start bombing that. England continues their bombing campaign in Germany. And eventually Hitler says, look, if you're going to continue bombing our military infrastructure, we're going to start bombing London. And he sends, I forget the name of it, but one of his advisors, he sends him into Scotland, parachutes in, says, hey, I have a peace treaty right here in my hands. All it needs is signatures. We can end this war right now. And what does England do? They throw him in jail for the rest of his life.
That's right.
And the guy dies away from his homeland because England wanted a war. Winston Churchill wanted a war. And that's exactly the same thing that Israel is doing right now. If they actually wanted a peaceful negotiation with Iran, they could have it right now. They could have it in 5 minutes. But they don't. They want some kind of a war.
Mm-hmm. They want a war between Iran and America. That's what they want.
Yeah, they don't necessarily want a war between them and Iran.
That's right.
But they want to drag us into it.
That's right. And because the goal of Israel is to defeat both Iran and the United States. They want to be the regional power, not the United States. Mm-hmm. And they don't want to share that power with Iran. And ultimately, this is why I think that Saudi Arabia enters into these alliances with Israel. Because Israel's goal is to not share hegemony with Iran. Mm-hmm. And so, what do you think about what America's fundamental goals are?
I think it depends on who we're talking about when we say America. If you talk about the American people, obviously the American people right now, they don't want a war. They want peace in the Middle East. They want to bring our boys home. That has been what I think the majority of Americans want since the fall of Kandahar, since Afghanistan withdrawal. But even before then, I mean, Ron Paul was running for president. He was running for the Republican ticket on predominantly the position of no more wars in the Middle East. Let's get out of there. Leave these sand monkeys to kill each other. Yeah. We're just going to go home and do our own thing. And he didn't use that language, but that's the feeling I think of a lot of people, especially the libertarian-minded people. They're like, hey, not our circus, not our monkeys. Let's go home. And then, but when you talk about the GAE, the Great American Empire, the deep state, whatever you want to call them, I think they like where they're at, which is they can use American tax money. They can utilize our tax basis as cannon fodder, use young American blood as cannon fodder, use our money and our economy as money to maintain American hegemony in the entire world. They want to see the fall of Russia. They want to see the fall of China. They want to see the fall of Iran. Anybody that is any kind of competition to the United States militarily and economically needs to go. That's why we're so big on supporting Taiwan. There's really no reason why the United States needs an island in the middle of the Chinese Ocean. It gives us nothing. I mean, my hand tools, my Craftsman hand tools that used to be made in America are made in Taiwan now. How hard would it be to bring that back? Not hard at all. But, we have to have Taiwan as a trade partner to get, quality goods as opposed to cheap goods. And the reason we do that is because we want to have some reason, some excuse to have a military presence right on the shores of China. So I think ultimately the GAE, the Great American Empire, the reason that we're supportive of Israel, you've mentioned the religious thing. We have a lot of dispensationalists and Zionists in our country who have a religious affiliation. But even, the United States is not anymore a religiously majority people. When I go to work, my boss, my coworkers, they don't really give a rip about Israel. They, I mention Israel, if ever, they'll be like, oh yeah, that country that is at war with Iran right now. I've heard about it on TV. They're our greatest ally, whatever that means. I don't really care. So I think, and then in the religious right, you see a movement of anti-Zionism coming in, especially among the Reformed. That's gaining ground with people, with the Roman Catholics. It's always been a little bit under the surface, this anti-Zionism. And that's growing, I think. And then, you have the Eastern Church, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, people such as yourself who come from that perspective, have always been anti-Zionist, understanding that, the true church is Israel.
That's right.
And so when you say America, the problem is, who is America? What is an American? And part of our problem is there's no consensus on what we want in the Middle East. And I think that's why our politics is so shattered at the moment, is because everybody wants something else.
Yeah, I think that's true. Actually, if you talk to the Russians or the Chinese, they'll tell you that there's, even at the deep state level, there's no agreement on diplomacy. Like, the Russians actually invented a word which says not agreement capable. And that's what they call America. It's not that America won't keep its agreements. It's just simply not capable of making them, because there's no process which binds the state to these agreements. So you're right. There are Christian Zionists, and there's not a super lot of them. And similarly with AIPAC is not a giant lobby. It's just that a lot of billionaires are in that lobby. And they punch way above their weight. And they influence elections in critical places through Christian Zionism. And it has a tremendously powerful political effect, I think. And so I don't think we get, if you read Mearsheimer's The Israel Lobby, it's not some conspiracy or anything like that. It's just a normal, everyday American political lobby. It's just composed of, a couple of hundred billionaires. So it's like super, super powerful. I do think we are looking for regime change in Iran. I think I'm talking about America, the state, but even the normie conservatives that I talk to, I have several meetings that I attend every week, and I get the normie conservative perspective at these meetings. These are Republican meetings, mainly boomers. And they would like to see regime change. And I think the deep state also wants to see that, both to prevent, Iran from getting a nuclear bomb, but also we can put American bases right against the Belt and Road Initiative and right against all those lines of communication between China and Russia.
Yeah. Put it right on the doorstep of Russia too.
Yeah. And so that's a disrupt China and Russia play that I think nobody's really talking about.
You had mentioned earlier something that I wanted to show, because I don't know if everyone knows about this. Jeff, I've got a screen share. This is a map of Greater Israel. It's not a conspiracy theory. This actually is, if I'm remembering correctly, based on the borders that God told Abraham.
Yes, that's right.
Would be his land. And so, interestingly enough, at no point in any history was Israel's borders all of that.
No.
But if you take the Abraham, this is all your land promise, then you have
this was promised to me 3,000 years ago. Here are those lines.
Yeah, and so
Right.
that would be what you're saying. That's what Israel wants long term.
Yes.
Territorially.
And for those who are just
there are
listening,
there are actual military units that have that map on their shoulder patches. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For those who are just listening, I mean, this is half of Iraq, at least half of Syria,
the northern part of Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all of Jordan,
Egypt.
It looks like
Egypt is a huge country, but the profitable part of Egypt is all gobbled up by this.
That's right.
Yeah, the border of that looks to be the Nile. It's basically everything in Egypt east of the Nile.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a huge portion. I mean, they'd have to demolish quite a lot of political power to achieve that. And like you said, there's units in Israel who have this patch.
That's right.
So it's not like some made up conspiracy theory. So, I mean, I could see that, what you were asking, what America's interest in all this is. I think it's really just being a puppet for Israel. I don't know why it is that way. I think that's where a lot of the crazier conspiracies go, where you're talking about, Israel has tapes of this, Ted Cruz was, wearing this dress and dancing this jig, or something far more sinister. And that's why Ted Cruz, stomps his feet, claps his hands.
I mean, perhaps I just buy, if you read Mearsheimer's book, The Israel Lobby, you just find that it's just a normal political lobby, like the NRA lobbies. The NRA is a very powerful lobby, or was at one time.
Can you explain what you mean by that? By IPAC not being a powerful lobby, because it seems like they own. Like, I said, it is.
It is.
AIPAC and the Israel lobby are not necessarily the same thing.
That's right.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I'm saying they are powerful. What I'm saying is we don't really need a conspiracy theory to explain their power. 200 billionaires are part of the Israel lobby, so that is enough to make you powerful. Okay, if you had 200 billionaires in the NRA, we'd all be walking around strapped right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everywhere we want.
Well, some of us do.
It's like it's an extraordinarily powerful conventional lobby. It probably should be subject to FARA and have to register as a foreign agent.
Careful. You say that and you'll get shot in the head in Dallas, Texas.
You're right. Yeah. You're right. I can commit suicide shooting myself in the back of the head twice, right?
Mm-hmm.
But but we really just don't need to go very far to see that it's just super powerful, and it's a conventional lobby. The bad part about AIPAC is that lots of it is funded by Israel. And it's funded indirectly. So we send all this aid money to Israel. Israel gives this money to NGOs. NGOs give this money and invest into billionaires' projects, and the billionaires take the money and invest it into AIPAC. So there's a laundering machine. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So effectively, the U.S. taxpayer is paying AIPAC. Mm-hmm. And that's another reason that it's extremely powerful. If it had to register under FARA, the Foreign Agent Registration Act, we would be able to follow that trail of money. That's probably the big reason that they don't want to register. Mm-hmm. So I think that's basically the American strategy to maintain the stability of Israel, which is a result of AIPAC and Mossad interference in our politics and propaganda and so forth. Because I know a lot of normie Republicans that just tell me Iranians are irrational and they have to all be murdered. Like I have had people tell me that over and over again. They want to gain control of the Iranian government. They'll probably nominally say that's to keep it from getting a nuclear bomb, but really it's to establish bases for power projection, which will disrupt China and Russia. I think to accomplish that, the American state would like to do that with aerial attacks, color revolution propaganda, and economic warfare. They don't want to do ground troops. So I think Iran wants a ground attack. I think Israel wants a ground attack, but I think the American military apparatus does not want that. And they're going to rely mainly on special forces and, the omniscient technical intelligence that we have with satellites and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Palantir.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Palantir doesn't want a ground war because Palantir doesn't have ground troops. That's as little as I like Palantir, that's actually playing in our favor. Yeah. Because they want to do everything through AI, through long-range technological observation and precision strikes. Yep. And as little as I like my tax money paying for the murder of civilians in a country on the other side of the planet, that actually is preferable to me getting murdered in that country on the other side of the planet.
Right.
As far as a ground war is concerned, I heard some people talking about this the other day. They said, a ground invasion of Iran only has a couple of options. You could come through the Arab Strait. We could deploy off of Saudi Arabia, which right now is our only option. It would have the advantage of we would immediately seize the oil fields. If we seize the oil fields, we would cripple their economy immediately. Overnight, their economy would cease to exist.
That's exactly
the problem is
Syria.
You get to the other side of those oil fields, and now you have to climb a bunch of mountains.
Yeah,
and it's just like Afghanistan, only worse. These mountain ranges go all the way from the Iraq border all the way to Pakistan.
Yes,
the Hindu Kush. And trying to push soldiers up mountains is just about the only thing that's harder to do than a beach invasion. So you've got Normandy, and then immediately after, mountain warfare. The bloodiest battle in European warfare in World War II was when the Allies were trying to push through the Italian Alps. It was just a meat grinder. It was a bloodbath, and the Germans were hard troops to fight in those mountains. These people were raised in those mountains. They were familiar with them, and we'd be doing the exact same thing in Iran. The other options are invade through Afghanistan, but we're no longer in Afghanistan. It would take us a matter of at least a year, probably 2, maybe more, to set up an invasion force to go from Afghanistan into Iran. Iran also has access to Afghanistan, so they'd be countermeasuring us the entire way. The other option is to invade down south from Georgia, which is in Russia's backyard. Russia's not going to allow that.
Nope.
The other option is to cross through in Iraq, where we do have a presence, not enough of a presence for a ground invasion. So we'd have to spend about a year building that up. But then you have the immediate problem of pushing up into those mountains again. And it's not going to be easy any way you slice it. I don't think the American people have the stomach for it.
No, they don't.
Even the people who want regime change in Iran, the people who are like, yeah, Israel's our greatest ally, regime change in Iran, they don't want to send our boys to go die in the Iranian mountains. And I think as soon as you get people coming back in flag-draped coffins, you're going to have a huge, huge pushback, not the least of which, will be people like us who say, hey, the true Israel is the church. What are we doing over there fighting for Satanists? Bring our boys home. So, I just don't think it's in the cards right now. I know Israel wants us to do it. I am fairly convinced by your argument that Iran wants it because they see this as their Vietnam. We can turn the mountains of Iran into the jungles of Vietnam. We can set mines, we can set traps, we can use gas, we can use all sorts of weapons. I mean, we've got this uranium that's just sitting in the ground. We've got, radioactive material we can create. Dirty bombs are easy to make.
Sure.
I mean, it's nuclear weapons are hard to make because you don't want the nuclear stuff, the radioactive material leaking. If you don't care, if you're strapping this bomb to the back of a high school student and he's your, guided missile, as it were, you can strap that to a 12-year-old kid, tell him, hey, there's an installation. Here's, something, a little bag of sand to put in your pocket. And you go in there and then you just throw it up in the air. It's like, it really is that simple. And yet I don't think we have the desire as Americans to tangle with that.
No, I totally agree with you. I think the military-industrial complex does not want ground warfare in Iran. They want a color revolution, aerial bombardment, and financial warfare to do the job. I noticed that Z says that he's been thinking about Xenophon's Anabasis.
Yeah, he says, speaking of ground invasion in Persia, I've had Xenophon's Anabasis in my mind all day. The thing to keep in mind is when Alexander invaded Persia, he actually did it as a friend. So he unlike us, he actually had friends on the ground. And yeah, right. He went up into the mountains and on the high mountain plains and killed a lot of people. But that was after he already had kind of taken possession of the country. So we will not have that advantage this time around.
Well, then the question, so we got two actors that probably want an American ground invasion. We got Israel and we got Iran itself. America, the state of America, does not want to do a ground invasion. What do you think Trump wants?
You know, I have heard some people saying that Trump wants a ground invasion. I don't think he does. I think Trump wants the Nobel Peace Prize. I think he wants to have, the Abraham Accords. He wants to bring Iran in. And if he can get a regime change in Iran, if he can get the Shah back in power, the Shah who is a Western puppet, his daddy, the old Shah, was a Western puppet. He was pro-Israel. He was pro-West. And the problem is he bet on the wrong horse. We were not able to maintain him there. Because he's too close to Russia and China, and ultimately China and Russia have more skin in the game, and so the U.S. was not willing to give him the kind of support he needed to be the dictator in that country that we wanted him to be.
Something we talked about before we started recording was similarities with how Afghanistan got us to go to the other side of the world and fight on their territory. We were saying about Iran wanting a ground invasion. I'm sure most people can see this if they just look at a map, but America is very isolated from all these conflicts, and we don't have to deal with them on our own home turf. And so if a country like Iran wants to go to war with us and be on the winning side, they can just say, hey, come here.
Come get me.
Try to fight us here. It's a lot cheaper to fight a war on your own home turf. You don't have to send. I mean, I can't even fathom the amount of money that it took just to get my one little unit over to Afghanistan. I mean, we're literally put on like movable pallets that had chairs on them into these gigantic planes. And I mean, it's a huge operation to invade a country with modern warfare. And I mean, there's no other way that like a hot war would actually happen other than us going over there. Iran wouldn't send people over here. I mean, it would just be
no. But I think what Iran will do is create a series of provocations with the aim of tempting the U.S. into direct conflict on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this is what bothers me with, we're talking about the Israel lobby, is there's really no American interest to be fighting with Iran. I don't see it, at least. I mean, you would think we'd be buddy with them since they provide so much oil.
Yeah. I mean, if you made me, benevolent dictator for 4 years, I would try to seek a balance of power in the Middle East that would check both Iran and Israel. I would do what Israel's trying to do between the U.S. and Iran. I would do between Israel and Iran. I would create a recurring, never-ending conflict where they would check each other, and no one would ever rise to challenge our power in the region, right?
That'd be amazing.
That's the foreign policy, in my view, we should have been pursuing since the 70s. But unfortunately, we have decided to side with Saudi Arabia and Israel and pick a side in this Muslim civil war. And I think it's unwise. Kissinger attempted to do this, by the way. Kissinger attempted to create this balance of power, but I think he was just overcome by the intelligence services, and it just never really happened. We kind of did it with Syria, Jordan, Egypt, a little bit, but we never created a true balance of power between the two most powerful forces, Israel and Iran. That's what I would think would be, if I did an analysis of America's best interest, that's what it would be. So I would task the CIA with fomenting war, perpetual war between Iran and Israel. And then, slowly wean Israel off of our aid until they equalize with Iran, and neither side can win.
Well, I wish we could just cut the cord completely overnight on Israel, on really everyone, and just let them fight it out. We should, but there's, again, if you want to maintain regional hegemony from afar, you need to have proxies. And so maintaining the ability to have those proxies, sometimes that's useful. And, we've done it many times in the past. We could arm Iran and Israel and let them fight it out. It'd be awesome. And so a balance of power strategy is what I've always advocated in the Middle East. But the Gaza conflict showed me that was never going to happen. The Palestinians, if we could have got a two-state solution in Israel, would have been an excellent check and balance on Israel as well. Because Israel is a territorially expansionist state. It's the only territorial expansionist state in the entire region. So it's inherently destabilizing to the region. Yeah, I saw that firsthand. Actually, I was just talking with my wife about that this morning, that, when I was there in Israel, like 10 years ago-ish now, they'll build like a cell phone tower on the West Bank, right? Not in their territory, but they'll do that. And then, now we have to protect our cell phone tower because, you guys would destroy it. And then it's now we have to build a neighborhood around it. Whatever. Yeah. Jeff, I saw you were trying to say something, but you're muted.
No, it's all good. Okay, I'm listening.
So they'll build a radio tower, and then they'll be like, oh yeah, but school kids keep shooting fireworks at it, so now we need a military installation to protect it.
Sure.
And then we need a neighborhood to supply the military base, and it's like,
yeah, that's what they do. And the idea of using armed settlers to take land is very ancient, right? And it works.
Yeah, we are sitting in America after all.
Exactly.
It's England wanted to colonize the New World. They wanted to push out France and Spain. So what did they do? They said, hey, there's free land over there. Get you a gun, get you an axe, and go get you some land. And armed settlers conquered this territory, and it is ours by birthright because of the things that our forefathers did by conquest and taking this land. Absolutely.
That's right. John Carter asks, Jeff, have you listened to many of the lectures from the YouTube channel Predictive History? Much of what you said lines up almost perfectly. Yeah, I listened to the guy, and I don't agree with him on some pretty fundamental things. He's not a realist, for example. I think he has some misunderstandings about some of the conflicts the U.S. has been in. But I think when it comes to his Iran analysis, he's pretty accurate. And when I first sat down about 4 weeks ago, and I wrote down what I thought was the perspective on national strategy and then an operational approach to achieving that strategy. When I watched his latest video, which I think it came out 2 days ago or something, it was 95% of what I had written down. And so he and I are probably using the same primary sources. I rely a lot on RAND Corporation reports. I also rely a lot on the U.S. Marine Corps, because the Marine Corps is much smaller than the other services, and the Marine Corps it has to kit out and make recommendations that have to be more accurate because it's smaller. And so I tend to rely on Rand and the Marine Corps, and I got to the almost same place that he did. I don't agree with him on a number of things about, for example, his view of Israel. I think he overstresses the apocalyptic messianic view of the Israelis. He overstates that quite significantly. I think Israel is just a normal territorially expansive power. And you can see absolutely why. Israel is not wide enough to be strategically defensible.
Yeah, it's the size of New Jersey.
Yeah,
I mean, we've been seeing that with these missiles hitting it from Iran. It's like, well, Iran doesn't necessarily need to target locations. They can just shoot it in a general direction. It'll hit something because it's just stacked so tight. And that's the problem going the other direction is Israel, if they launch rockets and projectiles at Iran, it's so spread out that, if we miss a nuclear facility, we're going to land somewhere in a high mountain desert and kill a couple sheep.
Right.
And, we just spent a couple $1 million on a very significant weapon to go ruin some shepherd's day. Yeah. It's like, that's not a good trade-off.
Population density in Israel is much higher than in Iran, and generally, it's not true of Tehran, but it's true generally. And so missile attacks are going to automatically be more effective and with that, right? Z makes another comment about Xenophon. He's like...
Yeah, he says Xenophon's Anabasis was before Alexander. They went as mercenaries on one side of a civil war, and their guide died in battle. They had to march all the way home while under attack. Yeah, sorry, I got Arion's Anabasis of Alexander confused with Xenophon's Anabasis. I have not read Xenophon's Anabasis, but I've heard about it. How
it's truly excellent, truly excellent.
And then having to fight your way home. You get there, the war's over, and this is pre-modern transportation.
I read it to my sons when they were 9 years old. And they were just on the edge of their seat. They begged me to read it to them every single day. Like, they loved that book. My favorite part of the book is when Xenophon has to justify himself, the speech that he gives when he has to justify himself to his men. And then the account of where they had to go over the mountains and come back down. And it's a really interesting account of the logistics. And they have to do some mountain fighting when they're up there. And it's just a really excellent book. I cannot recommend that book enough. I've probably read it 20, 30 times. It's just a really good book.
Yeah. Well,
I have a map
going into shopping cart right now.
I had a map that I don't know if I can add this. Oh, here you go. This is the expansion that we were talking about in map form. It's truly incredible how small of a territory Israel was given directly after World War II. And they just ran with it.
Yeah, they're territorially expansionist. And I have people all the time argue with me about this, and it's just not arguable. They are a territorially expansionist power, and they're driven to it through absolutely rational calculations about their survival. They are not a strategically defensible country if they're going to be that small. They have to be bigger to be defensible, and they know it. Mm-hmm. They absolutely know that.
Now, I know that part of this is at least inaccurate because the Golan Heights is like the northernmost part of it, and Israel has taken that as well.
Yeah.
So this map is out of date, as it were.
Well, it's bigger. It's only showing the borders of the 1947. Basically, but if I could try to describe it, it's that part just northeast of the Sea of Galilee is going to be the Golan Heights. Right. And basically they took it because they said that strategically they couldn't be safe.
Yeah.
With
if Syria owns this, they can shoot rockets at us. Therefore, I have to own it.
Yeah.
It'd be a bit like America seizing, the Quebecois ports in Canada and being like, well, you can't have this because if you do, it'll threaten our trade.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
nevertheless, they did.
I think we have to have the ability to take the strategic point of view of the actors here. If you take Israel's point of view, they're right.
Yeah.
If the enemy can take the Golan Heights, they can use rockets and direct artillery attacks, and that's actually happened, right? So they're right about that. They're too small to be strategically defensible, and so they're inherently, by the inevitable calculus of offensive realism, they're inevitably a geographically expansionist power. Mm-hmm. And this makes for some reason, makes a lot of Republicans uncomfortable to talk about that. Iran is not a territorially expansive power. Egypt,
they've got everything they want right inside their own borders.
They sure do. Yeah,
they are a crossroads, a natural crossroads. They can just sit there and cash in.
And they're defensible. They have a defensible,
highly defensible.
Yeah. So this is one of the things that, if you look at the destabilizing, people talk about the destabilizing, impact of Iran in the region. Well, the destabilizing impact of Israel is its territorial ambitions. Mm-hmm. And believe me, people in Jordan absolutely know Israel covets their territory.
Oh, yeah.
There's no secret to them. I want to come back to Trump, though. John Carter brought up predictive history, and predictive history talked about this a little bit, that Trump's interests may not align with the interests of the American state. And this is something that was written about in several papers at the Rand Institute about. They didn't mention Trump, but the way they did it is the way Rand often writes these things is they create a hypothetical. And so they said, well, what if a president doesn't, have the same concept of national interest that the defense establishment has? What would happen? What would that be like? That's the kind of thing that Rand writes. But I got the feeling reading it really was about Trump. And I think that where predictive history made me think about something I hadn't previously considered. And I think he's right. Trump is super pissed about the 2020 stolen election, I think. And if you look at the way Trump has treated NATO, Trump, I think, really hates these globalist elites that, essentially robbed him of power in 2020. And I think he's very much against these people. And a lot of those people are in the intelligence and defense establishment. We know that the fake Russia dossier was done with the CIA and MI6, for example. And so I think his goals include the destruction of that global elite. And I think it's possible that I'm not saying this is the case, but I think it's quite possible he may think a land war in Iran is just the way to get rid of those people. And so you may have a new actor on the stage. Rather than 3 state actors, you have 3 state actors and Trump. And in some ways, maybe Trump's ideas align with Iran's and Israel's, which is an astonishing place to be. And how could he best do that? Give the American empire everything that it wants and just send it into war and just let it destroy itself, put it into a position to be defeated, and all the while seem to advocate for regime change. But then when resistance increases in the United States, use it politically within the United States to finally defeat the globalist enemies that screwed him over in 2020. That is a possible scenario.
How do you believe that that's going to screw them over? Like in what way? Is just because they're suddenly unpopular? Because
look, everything is propaganda. So the idea is that they get framed the same way he did, the same way he got framed.
Mm-hmm. So essentially what you're saying is he wants a land war in Asia.
Oh, no, I'm not saying he does. I'm saying it's an interesting possibility.
Yeah. But theoretically, within this hypothetical, he wants that land war in Asia, but he wants to counter signal it the entire time so that, by the time it happens, he can be like, I did my best. I tried to stay out of it, but the deep state, they all want us to get dragged into war. And then, he uses that as a bully pulpit to just beat the tar out of the people that he hates. Meanwhile, doing everything politically to bring about that end.
That's right.
It's an interesting hypothetical. I certainly hope that's not the case.
Yeah, if you look at, certainly in the short term, but in the long term, if these people were defeated, I don't know that I would cry very much. If you look at who has the power of propaganda in the country right now, it's definitely Trump. And I think Trump can actually overcome a lot of the deep state propaganda that Republicans, for example, are subjected to. And he may be the only guy I've ever said that about, the 30 years I've been doing politics. So
he certainly has a way of bringing his message across. You see this where, the media is used to having their guys that they can bring on and just embarrass. And Trump seems to be immune from it. He can steer the conversation the direction he wants to. Yeah. He's fast on his feet and quippy. He's not a debater, but he's great at, schoolyard humiliation rituals.
Yeah, 100%.
So, aren't we so glad that somebody like Donald Trump wasn't president? Yeah, because you'd be in jail. It's like, boom, that quick. It's something that the media is not used to because they're used to erudite conversations and arguments about policy, and they're going to pin you down in the minutiae, make you look like an idiot, like, what is Aleppo? They're going to make you seem like everybody knows what Aleppo is. It's the capital of Syria. And then it turns out the next day, actually, Aleppo is not the capital of Syria. It's just a big city in Syria.
Yeah.
Well, it's not the capital, but it's like their most popular. Well, it's not the most populous. It's just an important one.
It's an ancient city.
But in the meantime, you have this guy who looks like an imbecile. He looks like a dork. And they'll play, farmed clips of him talking across his tongue in a funny way when he's trying to say something silly, and they'll make you look dumb. They did this with Ron Paul. Ron Paul was a wonderful communicator, very good on policy, but they gaslit the entire United States into thinking the guy was just a crazy nut job.
Right.
He just wants everybody to smoke weed and live in their mom's basement. And it worked. Trump just, for some reason, he has the magic about him where, if he walks into a room, everybody knows he's the king. And this is before he was president. Some men are born with this. Yeah. This is why when people talk about, the next ticket's going to be Don Jr. It's like, no, he doesn't have his dad's machismo. He can't pull off the same thing. And Barron Trump, despite the fact that he's a kid or very young, he has that presence and he has that machismo, and it's just a thing that you either got it or you don't, and it can't be learned or bargained with. It's just, it is there.
There's a change in political rhetoric, and I think it's been created mainly by social media, but also by sitcom culture in the 90s. And I remember witnessing this. Debate is essentially settled by verisimilitude, right? It's you try to align what you're saying to the preferences and desires of the people you're talking to. That seemed to stop about the late 90s. And by the time we get to Obama, there's a really weird kind of comedy. It's almost like political rhetoric's been replaced by comedy rhetoric. The rhetoric of the stand-up comedian seems to be what is most persuasive today. Aristotle pondered this stuff, right? He was like, if I give somebody a logical demonstration of something, that should be persuasive. but he found through his own experience that it actually provokes skepticism in people. And
the more you try to explain something, the more people think you're trying to take them for a ride.
Yeah. Whereas a well-chosen example would persuade people when, for all they know, it could have just been cherry-picked out of the evidence, right? Mm-hmm. So what's persuasive to people now seems to be, and I think that's why stand-up comics get so much play on political issues now. The rhetoric of comedy, it's a kind of ridicule plus entertainment, is what passes for political rhetoric today. And Trump's very, very, very good at that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, people have said about Trump, even before he became president, they said he's one of the best comedians around. The difference is, instead of using his comedy to go on tour, he uses it to sell houses.
Right, right. And I don't know if that bodes good or ill for, our democratic institutions, but I don't think much of our democratic institutions.
Burn it all down.
I don't really care. I think we should be, I wish we could be insulated from this democratic requirement for political rhetoric. And if it could be left to people who have long-term skin in the game, I would be much more happy with that.
So do you find yourself leaning toward monarchy? Is that what you're hinting at there?
I think it was a tragic mistake that we didn't do what Hamilton wanted and have an elected monarch. Because we wind up with a schizophrenic government that, if you elected a guy at 49 years old and the civil service knew that it had to deal with that guy for like the next 30 years.
30 years, yeah.
They're not waiting that guy out, right? Mm-hmm. But right now, the bureaucracy can just wait Trump out and not do what he wants and all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And in 30 years, you can secure serious power. You know the system well enough to really exercise power. And you can make long-term commitments in foreign policy, which we can't make right now.
Yeah.
And so I think it was a mistake for us to not do that. And we probably should have elected judges for terms and elected the president for life.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I mean, we've had Samuel Johnson on the show before, and he is a proponent of monarchy.
Yeah.
And, he said something that really got the gears ticking in my head, which is that, George Washington was offered the crown. And if he had accepted, essentially, the Civil War would never have occurred.
That is correct.
The ravaging of the South, all of the problems with slavery, all of that could have just been, if you had a monarch in charge, he could have just been like, hey, guys, we don't like slavery anymore. I'm buying you out. Right. And that would have been the end of it. And, on the plus side, too, if George Washington had become king, eventually you would have had King Robert E. Lee. He's the direct inheritor of that hereditary title if it had become such. And, being a proud Southerner, it's hard for me to pass that one up, just the idea of King Robert E. Lee.
Yeah, that's right. There's an interesting libertarian book. Parts of it are a cure for insomnia, but parts of it are very interesting. It's called Democracy, the God That Failed. It's by a libertarian economist named Hans Hermann Hoppe. Mm-hmm. And he says, look, I'm a libertarian, so I think the best form of government would be to not have a government. Okay, well, you're stupid. Move on. So, because, you can wish for things that can never be. Okay, fine, right? But he said, if I couldn't have a libertarian government, I'd rather have a monarchy, because people are freer under monarchies than they are under democracies.
Yeah. Well, and in that book, he just lays out the problem of incentives.
Yes.
A monarch is incentivized to the good of his own country because he's going to give it to his kid.
Yeah, that's right.
He wants to have a strong military, he wants to have a strong economy, and he wants to have happy populace, which means a free people. because free people are happy people. So he's incentivized to do all those things. Well, if you have somebody who's elected for 4 years or 8 years at best, what is he incentivized to do? He's incentivized to plunder the treasuries.
Plunder the country. Yeah,
that's right. So
all democratically elected officials are.
Yeah, and it's got a track record of 100% right now.
Yeah,
100%. Democratically elected people plunder the treasuries.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, even the good senators, even the good congressmen go to Congress poor and leave rich.
Yeah, that's right.
You can't do that without plundering the treasury.
Hopa makes another point that, and I've tried to explain this. I've done this experiment to explain this to boomer normie conservatives who are Republicans, and they just can't get their head around this. But de Tocqueville talks about how there's this oppressive conformity in democracy, and it creates a uniformity of opinion and other things, for the simple fact that your neighbor. You have to give a shit what your neighbor thinks and does, because they vote and they can take things from you, right? Mm-hmm. And Hopa makes the point that, when you have no say in the operation of government in a monarchy, nobody cares what you do. Because your vote isn't going to take anything.
Yeah, who cares what the peasants think?
Yeah, and the peasants don't care what each other thinks, because you can do what you want in your house, but you can't make me do it in my house, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the king is very far away.
Yeah.
Every time they want to build an apartment complex anywhere in my city, I'm like, oh boy, here comes the riffraff. I know what quality of people are going to be living there. And I wouldn't care if it wasn't for the fact that they could vote in the city elections and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. Yeah,
an apartment complex on the other side of town affects me zero, because they don't make laws that pertain to my property taxes.
That's right.
The king walks by, looks at it, says, "Here's your property tax, pay up."
That's right.
Pretty straightforward.
Right. Or one day they decide property tax is not a good way, and the king just changes it the next day. Okay, we're going to do it this way. We don't have a decades-long process to adjust the tax system.
Mm-hmm. And if the people don't like it, they can make their voice heard immediately, and then the king can deal with it within the moment. We have examples of that from history. The tax man getting stoned to death. To your tenser, Israel, what do we have to do with the son of Jesse?
Well, I'll tell you this. I have an interesting story. I used to run a company in Hong Kong, and I was there during the changeover when China took it over. And in fact, I remember. One day I went to work, and there were, Hong Kong Chinese police and British police uniforms. And the next day I went, it was communist Chinese military with AK-47s directing traffic. It's like literally one day that happened. But this will show you different cultural views affect the way people think about the laws and politics. So in Hong Kong and in southern China, organized crime is considered a public good, and people happily contribute to it. And the reason is, in the history of southern China, when the Manchus would become oppressive and take too much from the people, they wouldn't be able to pay the Tongs and the Triads. So the Tongs and Triads would raise private armies and kill all the tax collectors.
Based.
So the way the Chinese understand organized crime is as a check and balance on the government. And so they see it as a legitimate tax. And the Triads and the Tongs actually perform legitimate functions. I actually one time had to use a Triad one time to enforce a contract. And they did it. They did enforce it for me.
Yeah. And because they had a reputation to uphold as well. If the people come to you for justice, you have to provide justice, or else you will be replaced by someone else.
Yeah. So that shows you that the cultural history of a place can completely change your idea about what criminality and freedom are. Mm-hmm. And I just don't think when we talk about geopolitics, we talk about that aspect enough. And so people talk about, the corruption in China. But a lot of people don't see it as corruption. They see it as a mechanism that controls the government. Mm-hmm. And they're happy to pay it.
Yeah. Yeah. Same is true, I'm sure, in Russia and Ukraine, where corruption is rife.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's hate the game, not the player.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're scratching me right where I itch, because I'm on a big Robin Hood kick right now, and everything about that seems to be essentially like Chinese Robin Hood or
Yeah. I mean, the prince has stopped enforcing justice, and his taxes are too high. The people can't pay them. So what do? They turn to Robin Hood. Hey, get me some justice. Avenge me of my foes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's
Tale as
basically
old as
an
time.
early form of mafia enforcer.
Yeah.
and he was seen as legitimate. Even today, we read it and we see him as legitimate.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. It's the story of Batman. Batman, who is he? He's the Caped Crusader.
Yeah.
The government is corrupt. The police no longer enforce the law, so the Caped Crusader must arrive and enact justice. That is the origin of that.
And that's another thing that about monarchy that I think is important too is, there's no such thing as a nation of laws, right?
Mm-hmm.
The laws
Rule
are
of law,
interpreted by men. Yeah, the laws are interpreted by men. The men decide what the laws mean. They determine like how once a transgression of laws occurred, they determine what it means to have transgressed it and to what degree. There's no way to put into like written or linguistic form all the things that are needed for that. So ultimately, men decide these things. Look at the courts that are redefining, the law to, prevent Trump from taking executive actions that are legitimate. The fact is, you're always going to be ruled by men. The laws don't really matter. I don't think that much. If you have a good king, he'll never use bad laws against you. If you have a bad king, he'll use good laws against you.
Yeah.
All that matters is the moral status of the authority.
I mean, essentially, this is the same argument that guns don't kill people; people kill people.
Correct.
It's not the gun, it's not the law, it's the guy behind it.
That's
and
right.
we were talking with a friend of ours recently, and he mentioned just in passing, functionally, the Congress and the Senate are over the law because they can change it.
Anytime.
And if you look practically at the way that comes out in our society, they are absolutely over the law.
Yes, they are.
How many laws do they break all the time, and nothing ever happens to them? You can talk all you want about how no man is above the law, but functionally we have an elected overclass who are not subject to that law.
Undoubtedly.
And in some places, it's enshrined in law that they are not subject to it. If I do insider trading, I go to jail. If a senator does insider trading, he gets paid for it. He makes a ton of money. And that's just one example among many. The tax laws are written by people who look at their own paychecks before they make the tax laws.
That's right.
It's corrupt from top to bottom.
Yeah, and that's the problem with democracy. I mean, people talk about liberal democracy, and I always laugh because it's a contradiction in terms. There's never been a liberal democracy. Democracy is ruled by the poor because the poor always outnumber the rich. Democracy is ruled by the poor. Liberalism came about before democracy, and it was put there to protect property owners. And it's based on land rights and things like that. So liberal democracy in some sense is just a contradiction in terms. I think the idea of the Enlightenment thinkers was that you get the best of both, but actually it's pretty clear you get the worst of both.
Yeah. I mean, there's a quote from that book that you've referenced already, Democracy, the God That Failed by Hans Hermann Hoppe, where he says, everyone in all of history has always seen democracy as a soft variant of communism. And it is only in the modern times that we have determined that it is something else.
That's right. And you tell people just stark similarities between communism and liberal democracy. For one thing, if you look at Europe and you look at the countries that came out of the Soviet Union and became liberal democracies overnight, what parties were immediately the most successful in the liberal democratic systems, in the parliamentary systems? The communist parties. They changed their name and they were the most successful, and they could navigate that system so much better than the other parties because it's so similar to the communist system. They both have a utopian vision of the future. They both have an idea of progress towards the future. One is, based on, some future where the worker is no longer alienated from their work. The other is where there's some utopia of perfect land ownership and property ownership. They both see progress. The whole history of the earth is progress. They have the same attitude, the totalizing tendencies towards everything. In liberal democracies, every little aspect of your life becomes regulated. Mm-hmm. Which just doesn't happen in aristocracies and monarchies.
Yeah, the king doesn't have time to tell you that you can't have a chicken coop in your backyard.
Yeah. And he's not even, he thinks it's probably just a bad idea to even spend any time on it.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine trying to come to a king and complaining that your neighbor's car that he parks on the curb has a flat tire?
Yes.
And
yes.
He would probably execute you for wasting his time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would be much more free from HOAs if I had a king.
Yeah,
than in a liberal democracy.
You know what's funny? What's funny though is, when we were talking about our friend Samuel Johnson, and he did one of our first episodes, and where he was just advocating for monarchy, and I wasn't convinced until he started, giving his spiel. But when we reached out for anyone to debate him, we got one guy who even bit, and then like a week later, he was like, nah, and I can't do it. And then like a week after that, he was like, you know what? I think I'm actually convinced of monarchy. So
wow. Yeah. That's one of the few times in online culture I've ever heard anybody being convinced of something. That's really good.
If you can find somebody to debate, like he's champing at the bit.
Yeah. And I mean, he's a lawyer and he's been a clerk for a Supreme Court justice. So he's got it.
Let's set him up with Destiny.
Oh, dude, if you could pull that off, oh man.
I don't know. That would go against me to have Destiny on my show, man.
Hey, man, all you got to do.
I might be small, but I have standards.
Just get the Clorox sanitary wipes. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
You'll be fine.
All right. Well, let's finish up these comments. And John Carter says, plug for the podcast Ars Politica, who gave an analysis and commentary on Xenophon's Anabasis a couple months ago. Ars Politica is a podcast by Stephen Wolfe and Thomas Accord, friends of the show. We had Thomas Accord on to talk about his book, Who is My Neighbor, which you can find right here. So, listen to Ars Politica by Who is My Neighbor. Great guy, great show. And we have that show. You can read. You can watch that, and he's a great guy. Fantastic.
All right.
John Carter also says, I listened through a good portion of Predictive History's video catalog today while playing amateur plumber and landscaper. Very useful to get analysis from a non-Westerner. We have blinders on here in the West. We really don't understand the way that non-Westerners think, or even Russians. You can call them Westerners or Easterners. They're really kind of their own thing. There was a Twitter thread I remember from a few days ago where some Russian military analysts were talking about Western weaponry, the Abrams tank and the Bradley. And one of the things they said about those is, they're pretty good, but ours are good enough and yours are too high maintenance and expensive. Our fighting vehicles can get hit, take just an absolute pummeling. They can go back into the factory, be rebuilt, and be back on the front lines in 2 weeks.
Right.
And Abram gets hit, and it just sits. The Afghanistan and Iraq are littered with the holes.
Yeah, they don't even fix them. Yeah.
Yeah, they're one use. They're one trick ponies. They're one use tools.
I know we have an Army guy here, but this is the thing the Marine Corps has always complained about. Is the Army has this heavy division concept, which is great for Homeland Defense, probably the best possible organization for Homeland Defense, but it is not deployable, right? And it's why it takes a year and a half, actually 2 years, to fully deploy the logistics and everything. Mm-hmm. And it's largely because the weapon systems, it's nothing to do with the Army. It's the weapon systems that the military industrial complex is making have these incredibly long logistics trails, complicated logistical requirements to get these things done, right? The 777 artillery is notorious. The Marine Corps hated it because the titanium fittings, you had to rotate them out every 3 months to get the titanium fittings checked. And then if they cracked, you had to get all stuff done. You know, Russian artillery is made out of softer iron. If shit starts bending or cracking, they can replace it. They can even hand forge it on site. It's like
just beat on it with the back end of an AK-47 till it works.
Yeah. You know, I won this contest when I was in the Marine Corps. They always have these contests, like if you could come up with an idea or something, and if they like the idea and it gets studied, you get some cash. I got like $10,000. Nice. I just said, look, I'm sick and tired. At the time, I was lugging around either a Dragon or a Carl Gustav. I was an assault man, so I was a demo and anti-tank gunner, right? And I was lugging these damn things around. And I realized one day, like, half the freaking weight I'm carrying is all propellant. It doesn't even hit the tank, okay? So I thought, I'm in the infantry, so like, you know, what am I doing engaging tanks at 800 meters? I should be doing close assault on tanks in close terrain. You know, I should be attacking tanks in the cities or in the forests, right? In the mountains. So I propose that every American can throw a football with pinpoint accuracy. If you look at a football, it's perfectly shaped to put a shape charge in it. You can put a shape charge that's as powerful as the Carl Gustav into a football and just throw it onto a tank. Just throw it on the top of a tank. And now you're carrying everything, all the weight you're carrying kills and breaks stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's really something to just low-tech thinking.
Yeah.
You know, that's what the Marine Corps was after with the littoral combat ship for the preparation for security competition with China in the barrier islands. They just wanted it very simple. They just want one switch and it turns off all electronic emissions. It's a hardware switch. Turns off all electronic emissions.
Mm-hmm.
Everything just goes dark.
Yep, battery shut off. Bam.
Simple, totally simple. But the problem is you can't get a defense contractor to build something that simple.
Because there's no money in it.
No money in it. They have to put complicated software systems and everything to turn off the electronic emissions. You know, it's like, so the Marine Corps just gets very frustrated with the logistics systems that the American military, it's essentially become a jobs program. And it's actually, because a lot of it is financed, it's a large part of the Fed's program for money creation and control of the money supply. So it's a massive inflator of private debt. So the Marine Corps has like all these criticisms of this stuff because of that. But we need deployable units, and the heavy division concept is not it. And the Navy's current ship lineup is not it.
Yeah. Well,
I could go hours.
The follies of the
industrial
complex. Yeah, the military-industrial complex folly goes on and on.
My rant, I guess, from the Army side is I just bring up that the largest amphibious assault in human history was made by the United States Army and not the Marine Corps.
Yeah, that's true.
That's my thing. Actually, I take that back. The other one that I'll say, when Marines will say like, "Oh, we conquered Iwo Jima." It's like, well, yeah, if you want to conquer an island, you send the Marines. You want to conquer a continent, you send the U.S. Army. So that's my other little rant, I guess.
Well, it's simple math. There's more of them.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean the Army is massive. The Army is absolutely massive.
Yeah,
it's gigantic.
The Marine Corps has had to do area denial. The Marine Corps has to adopt a mobile strategy. So it roves around marauding at the battalion level, never stopping. And it can control the territory, but it doesn't really hold it. It's an elastic. It's kind of like an elastic defense. It just goes around ambushing all the time, so the enemy can't use the territory.
Yeah.
And because the Marine Corps is, it's infinitely smaller than the Army.
Yeah. Fob, what's that?
Yeah. Funny story. When I think about the Marine Corps, when I was in AIT, which is like our secondary training, I was a fueler, and we actually had maybe like 6 Marines in our class.
Okay. All right.
And it was funny that they would kind of be like, okay, this is a Marine only thing. We're just going to show you real quick, like what it is. And basically what Marine fuelers did was they connected the Navy equipment to the Army equipment. And I was just sitting, I was like, we could do that. Like, what? Why are these guys even here? This is such a weird thing to have. But that was it. Like they just had to learn how to connect the two equipments together.
It's the fact that those things don't.
The Marine Corps constantly has to deal with incompatibilities between the Army logistics system and the Navy system. Just constantly.
And the fact that those systems aren't already integrated is just really bizarre.
Yeah, I agree.
But it makes jobs for somebody.
It does. I've actually, I think that actually the Air Force should probably be rolled into the Army. There should be an air ground combat force, and there should be a naval combat force and a space combat force, because that would make the Army even massively larger than it is now.
Yeah.
So you would roll the space into the Navy, is what you're saying, or the space would be independent?
Space separate, similar to the Russians called it the Strategic Rocket Force. I would keep it separate. I would keep the Navy and the Marine Corps separate, and I would turn the Marine Corps, what it should be, into a commando force instead of a heavy infantry force. And then combine the Army and the Air Force into one air ground task force that's designed to not project power, but to maintain power in a region. At theater level breaching, the Marine Corps can do it, but the Marine Corps cannot. It's too small to hold a theater level objective.
Yeah. I've got to say, between your military tactic ideas and taxes and everything else we've talked about, you got my vote for king, or I guess my sword if we have to take it by force. I'm sold.
I had a friend of mine who actually spoke with Peter Hitchens, and we went to a lecture, and Hitchens was recounting this story where he had gone to the House of Lords, and he asked one of these old men who can barely walk. He's so old. Like, he asked him, like, how did your family get into the House of Lords? And he said this guy, like, stood up and pressed down on his cane and stood up as tall as he could get. And he said, by the battle axe, sir, by the battle axe. That's how he got into the House of Lords.
That's awesome. Yes, well, I know that not a lot of Christians like the Game of Thrones show, but there is a moment where one of the guys is like, I'd really like to have a house. And the guy's like, but you're just some, greasy soldier type guy. He's like, look, all these guys had an ancestor like me at some point. Like they didn't they didn't just like, the first guy didn't just like fall out of the sky looking all pomp and circumstance and
yeah. There is an interesting question around monarchy that in my own mind I think about, and aristocracy too. We're talking about aristocracy right now, but it applies to monarchy. In the times of the monarchs and in the times of aristocratic societies, merchants were not the highest class of people. Merchants didn't have the power that they have today. Men who fought wars had power.
Now when we say merchants, are we talking like how do I do 3 at once of these, the merchant? Or are we talking like
the happy merchants?
Guys, the guys that acquire, for example, if you look in the ancient world, it's often easier to look in the ancient world because everything was simpler. It was unseemly for a citizen to be rich. In Athens, it was the slaves that were rich. The richest people in Athens were the sea captains, and they were all slaves. And it was because, it was seen unseemly for a citizen to be corrupted that way. So the idea was, you need to live a modest kind of middle of the road life if you want to vote, if you want to be considered one of us. Political power was not associated with riches. It was associated with military power. And that then begins to change in the period of the German city-states, where the burghers began to become extremely powerful, mainly because they could buy military power, they could buy mercenaries. But it is a question, how would monarchy and aristocracy work in a commercial society, not one based on war and honor?
Yeah. Well, I think Donald Trump's rise to power has shown. Well, I think Donald Trump's rise to power has shown that what the American people really want is just someone to rally behind. They want to hear their voice come out of their leaders' mouth, and they I mean, he really just became a rallying point. There's nothing particularly great about many of the policies that Donald Trump has. Some of them are good. But the fact that he just says, we should build a wall 1,000,000 miles high. And like, I mean, we talk like that in the backyard over beers. And it excited people to hear that maybe not the solution is great or whatever, but that he's addressing the problems that we actually care about. And so I think that someone, you know, if you're talking about a rich person who would then become like king, I think Donald Trump has shown that you just have to be a man of the people, even though he's been rich his whole life. You know, when he talks about his small loan of $1 million that he got from his dad, I mean, he obviously built upon what he was given, but he talks to people like you see him on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he didn't want to talk about himself. He wanted to talk about, what's your opinion about this fighter in the UFC or all these kind of things. I mean, that I could see it going well if someone, you know, a businessman like Donald Trump being a monarch, and he wouldn't have to fight Congress. He could just do his thing, and the people would fight for him because they love him. I mean, people genuinely love Donald Trump, not because of his policies, but because of who he is as a man.
Yeah. I remember campaigning for Ted Cruz during the presidential election, and I would just knock on door after door. And here in Central Texas, it was just like I'd knock on a door that was, according to our papers, you know, this is a Republican voter. I'd be like, hey, I'm here to rep Ted Cruz. And they'd be like, oh, no, I'm voting for Donald Trump. I'm voting for Donald Trump. Just over and over. And so I was baffled by it. And I asked him, like, what is it that you like about Donald Trump? Because, you know, I'm a young guy. I'm a policy wonk. I'm a nerd. And, you know, Ted Cruz speaks to me on that level because he's all like, well, the Supreme Court, when they're doing this, that, and the other,
right,
you know, what they actually should have been saying. And then, you know, I talk to these, you know, rednecks with broken down cars in their driveway. I'm like, well, what is it you like about Donald Trump? And they're like, he's one of us, man. You know, I like him. I can trust him. I don't trust Ted Cruz. He's weaselly. You know, he looks like a weasel. But Donald Trump, he's one of us, man. And I just didn't see it. And, you know, here we are, you know, 10 years later, and I'm like, dadgummit, they were right.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I mean. Like, verisimilitude is how in democracies decisions are made. You know, how similar is this to me?
Yeah.
That's how decisions are made.
Yeah.
I know Dave Chappelle has a great monologue, and this is another example of how comedy culture is really what modern political rhetoric is. He has this great monologue. You can see it on YouTube. And he says he knew the moment when Donald Trump was going to win. And he said it was when Hillary Clinton was accusing him of cheating on his taxes. And he said, well, that just makes me smart. And she said, yeah, but you're ripping off the poor people. And he said, look, I'll tell you what. He said, I know for a fact that the tax system is totally corrupt and abuses poor people. You know why I know? Because in New York City, the most corrupt real estate market in the country, I had to use that system. And I know for a fact that rich people like you and your friends will never give up that system.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I know what you're saying is true, Hillary Clinton. And Chappelle said, that's what I knew was going to win. Because everybody in the country said, yeah, so it's really true. And Donald Trump just told the truth. You know, that's the sense people have. Yeah. He's very good at that.
And, you know, the other thing, too, is he can connect with few words.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, your explanation of it, I don't remember the exact wording of it, but I guarantee you use twice as many words as he did.
Oh, definitely.
To explain it. Because he's like that. He just boom, 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 and he gets his point across. And it's like, you know, as a guy who's trying to get into the communication game, I really envy that. It's
I mean, he
really
can soundbite anything, literally anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and, you know, people hunger for that man to rally around. And what it was funny I was thinking about is in England, like, people will just have, I mean, this is up until recently, people have a picture of the Queen, like, in their house. like just like on the wall or whatever. Like even in the Beatles song Penny Lane, it talks about a guy with like a locket that has a portrait of the Queen in it. And like people love that idea of saying like, this is my leader. This person represents my nation. We have a similar bloodline and similar history, and like this is a great. It's almost like a nation's flag personified,
right?
Anyway. And I think that is what people are hungry for in democracy that they don't have. I mean, we just don't have that anymore.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's finish with these comments and then get out of here. It's been a long show. We've been going for 2 hours and 40 minutes already. Z says, becoming a voter makes you a potential rival to the man with power, and the peasant is left alone. Yeah, there's something to be said for that. If you don't have any voting rights, the king doesn't really care what you think. And but all of a sudden, if you're picking the next ruler, Putin's much more likely to throw you in prison for saying stuff because you might be able to throw him out of his office. Z again says the logistics traits are the result of every congressman getting some pork for his district in order to vote for the budget. Yep. It's if the guy in Wisconsin is getting military contracts and the guy in California is getting military contracts, you've got to keep those things different enough to be making enough money for your guys back home. Right. Whereas, in a system where things are more streamlined, it's probably all coming out of one factory or two factories, and it's all designed to work together. But such is the world in which we live. All righty. Well, folks, we appreciate those of you who have stuck around this long. We appreciate y'all coming along for the ride. And those of you who are listening later, we hope you really enjoy this. Mr. Younger, it has been a wonderful show. We appreciate you sticking around for as long as you did.
Yeah, man, it's a good time.
We really enjoy the rambling toward the second, or as it were, the last quarter of the show, where we kind of talk about other things. But we started by talking about some of your history, and then Iran, and that foreign country that Sean and I are going to go die in someday. Hopefully, it doesn't come to that. But
I've done my contract, so
yeah, and he's got the disabled vet, so he'll be able to stay home. But I'm That's still right. Young, fresh blood, so they'll spill it somewhere.
Got it.
But we appreciate your expertise too. I mean, you're a very well-read man, and we really appreciate you bringing a different perspective to some of the nonsense that's just going on pervasively here. Folks, if you are not following Jeff Younger on Twitter, his @ is @Jeff Younger Show. Follow that one. There's like 3 different Jeff Youngers. Really? I'm not sure if they're all you or...
they're not.
Yeah, but they all have your picture.
I don't have any else. Okay, I need to find those and report them. So if you could pass their handles.
I'll definitely do that, because when we first met about a month ago or so, I went on Twitter to follow you, and there were like 2 or 3 different Jeff Youngers. Wow. But only one of them was posting, so I was like, well, this is probably him. And sure enough, when I contacted you in the messenger, that was the right one. Follow Jeff Younger Show, and thank you again, sir, for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. So long.
All right. And folks, go to bed, because tomorrow is a day that God has prepared good works for you to do in. And it is very late in the night, at least it is here. If you're in Australia, maybe you're still awake, but we appreciate y'all nonetheless. But get some good rest, get some good work done, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your Lord's Day. And we also hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful week. Good night.